She stood in her bridal whites while the man she'd loved for 7 years slid his hand around her best friend's waist and called her his in front of 2,000 people. No apology, no warning, just a public execution dressed up as a festival announcement. And when Elara Voss turned to the crowd for help, her pack, her family, the elders who'd watched her grow up, every single face looked away. Every one. If you've ever been the one everybody pretended not to see, stay with me till the end. Hit that like button, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, and let's go. The Hollowvale Valley had been preparing for the harvest binding for 6 weeks, and for 6 weeks, Elara Voss had been the only person in town who hadn't noticed something was wrong. That wasn't fair, maybe. She'd noticed. She just hadn't wanted to be the kind of woman who noticed. The valley sat inside a bowl of red mountains in the northern reaches of the Draven territories, a place where the wolf packs had kept the old customs longer than anywhere else. Every autumn, when the grapes came off the vines and the smoke from the orchard fires laid a soft gray lid over the sky, the Silver Pine pack threw open the festival grounds, and every unbonded wolf in the valley came down to drink cider, dance until their boots split. And if the moon agreed, stand in front of the binding stone and claim a mate for life. Elara had been planning her dress since she was 19. She was 24 now, and she sat on the edge of her narrow bed in her father's farmhouse with that dress laid across her knees like a wounded animal. Ivory, hand-stitched, a pattern of vines climbing from the hem because her mother had been a vine wright before the fever took her, and Elara had wanted her mother there in some way, even if only as thread. "You're going to burn a hole in it if you keep staring," her father said from the doorway. Hale Voss was a tall, thin man who'd gotten thinner since the fever years. He leaned on the doorframe with one shoulder and watched her the way he always watched her, like he was expecting her to break and trying to figure out where to stand to catch the pieces. "I'm not staring," Elara said. "I'm thinking." "Same thing, on you." She smiled, but it didn't quite work. "Dad." "Has Rowan been by the shop this week?" Her father took his time answering. He always did. Hale Voss had been a carpenter for 40 years, and he measured his words the way he measured his boards. Twice, slow, and with a pencil tucked behind his ear in case he needed to cross something out. "He came by Tuesday," Hale said. "What did he want?" "Didn't say." "Dad," Hale sighed. He came into the room and sat down on the cedar chest at the foot of her bed and put his big knotted hands on his knees. He asked if the venison was smoked yet. "For the banquet." I told him it was. He said good. Then he left. "That's it." "That's it, honey." Elara ran her thumb along one of the embroidered vines. The thread was already fraying where she'd touched it too many times. "He didn't ask about me." "No. He hasn't asked about me in a month, Dad." Hale Voss looked at the floor for a long time. He was a man who hated to lie and hated even more to tell a truth that was going to hurt somebody, and his daughter watched him war with both sides of himself for the better part of a minute. "Elara," he said finally, "if you've got a feeling, it's your feeling. Don't let me talk you into it or out of it. I don't know what that boy's thinking. I never have. His mother didn't either, and she tried longer than either of us. So you think something's wrong?" "I think," Hale said carefully, "that if a man is going to stand up in front of 2,000 people and take a mate for life, he ought to have spoken to her father about it by now. And he hasn't." The dress slid half off her knees. Elara caught it before it hit the floor. "He's just nervous," she said, and hated how small her voice came out. Rowan's always been like this. He gets quiet when something's big. He got quiet before he asked me to the spring run, remember? And before he brought me home from university. He needs to be inside himself before he can say anything." Her father didn't answer that. He stood up. He put one hand on the crown of her head, the way he'd done when she was 7, and scraped her knees, and he held it there a second longer than he usually did. "Wear the dress," he said. "You earned it." Then he walked out and left her alone with her mother's thread. The festival grounds took up the whole south meadow. By the time Elara walked down from the farmhouse with her dress under a cloak, the sun was already gone behind the western peaks, and the valley had gone that particular shade of blue that only happens in the mountains in late October, the blue of a bruise starting to heal. Lanterns hung from every apple tree along the path. Somebody had strung paper wolves between the branches. A tradition for children, supposedly, though Elara had never met a child who actually wanted one. The band was already warming up near the bonfire. She could hear the fiddles tuning, all those small sour notes finding each other and settling into a chord. Mira Ashford was waiting for her at the turn by the old cider press. "There you are," Mira said. She came down the path in a running half-jog, the way she had since they were 9 years old, and she grabbed both of Elara's hands in hers and squeezed them. "I was about to come up the hill and drag you down myself. Your hands are freezing. What did you do, walk without gloves?" "I forgot them." "You always forget them." "I know." Mira laughed. It was the laugh Elara had loved her whole life. Loud and slightly embarrassed about how loud it was. A laugh that always seemed to apologize for itself even as it was happening. Mira was a small woman with red-brown hair and freckles across her nose, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most interesting thing in the room. They had grown up 3 farms apart. They had lost their mothers in the same winter. They had learned to skin a rabbit together in Mira's father's kitchen when they were 11, and they had cried together when they were 16 and Elara's first boy had taken another girl to the spring run. And Mira had sat on the edge of Elara's bed that night and said, "He's a fool, El. He's a fool. And you're going to be fine. You're going to be better than fine. You're going to be legendary." "You're shaking," Mira said now, rubbing Elara's hands between her own. "Are you cold or are you nervous?" "Both." "Don't be nervous." "That's easy for you to say." Mira's laugh cut short for just a second. It was barely anything, a hitch, a half-beat of hesitation, the kind of thing Elara would remember later and want to slap herself for not seeing. "Yeah," Mira said. "Easy for me." Then she smiled again, and the smile was the smile Elara had known her whole life, and she pulled Elara down the path toward the lanterns. "Come on," Mira said. "Rowan's already there. He's been asking where you are." That wasn't true. Elara would understand that later. Understanding it later would be worse than not understanding it at all, because later she would remember every step of that walk down the path in her mother's thread, and she would remember the cold of Mira's hands, and she would remember that the one friend she had in the world had looked her in the face and lied as easily as breathing. But in that moment, Elara Voss only felt her heart come up into her throat, and she let her best friend lead her into the light. Rowan Kessler was already by the binding stone when they came out of the tree line. He looked good. He always looked good. Rowan was one of those men built narrow and long, all shoulder and jaw. With dark hair, he kept too short in a way of standing like he'd forgotten where to put his hands. He was wearing the dark green coat his father had worn the day he'd been bound. He'd spent money on a new shirt. Elara could see the collar, still stiff with starch. He was talking to one of the pack elders, nodding at something, and when he turned and saw Elara across the crowd, he did not smile. He did not smile. Elara felt that, the way a deer feels a twig snap 200 yards off. "Rowan!" Mira called and waved. He came across the grass toward them. The crowd was already thick, 300 people at least, and more coming down the path behind Elara every minute. The bonfire was going now, sparks climbing up into the blue dark. Somebody was playing an accordion. Somebody's child was crying. A man in a leather apron was carrying a tray of glazed apples and shouting for people to move out of the way. Rowan stopped 3 feet in front of Elara. He did not touch her. "You're late," he said. "I'm not late." Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "The binding isn't for an hour. I know when the binding is." "Rowan, I need to talk to you." He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her collarbone, or maybe the ground just past her collarbone. Mira had stepped back a half pace. Elara could feel her there, warm at her elbow. "So talk to me," Elara said. "Not here." "Then where?" He didn't answer that. He turned and walked toward the bonfire, toward the binding stone, and Elara stood for a second watching his back and his father's green coat, and she thought, she would remember thinking it for years afterward, something is going to happen and I cannot stop it. "El," Mira said softly, "go after him." "He just said not here." He meant, come on." Mira's hand was on her back now, gentle, pushing. "He wants you up there with him. He's nervous, you know how he is. Go." So Elara went. She crossed the grass toward the binding stone with her mother's vines stitched around her hem and the whole valley watching her, and she did not know, she would never forgive herself for not knowing, that Mira Ashford was walking 3 steps behind her the entire way. The binding stone sat in the center of a low stone circle at the edge of the meadow. It was an ugly thing, honestly. Just a hunk of granite about waist-high, flat on top, worn smooth by 400 years of hands. The old stories said the first wolves of the valley had laid their palms on it and made promises in a language nobody spoke anymore. The new stories said it was just a rock. Elara had never been sure which she believed. Tonight, looking at it across the fire, she wanted it to be the old story. She wanted the rock to do something. She wanted it to stop what was about to happen. The elders were already gathered. Packmaster Donald stood at the head of the circle in his ceremonial sash, his white beard yellow with pipe smoke, his eyes on the crowd the way a man watches weather. He nodded at Rowan. Rowan nodded back. Some agreement passed between them that Elara couldn't read. "Folks," Donald said, and his voice carried the way the voices of old pack leaders always carry. Not loud, but heavy, settling onto the shoulders of everyone in the meadow. "We'll get started." The crowd pressed in. 2,000 people. Easy. The whole valley had come down for the harvest binding, because the whole valley always came down, because there was nothing else to do in Hollowvale in late October, and because a binding was one of the only things that still felt like it mattered. Elara saw faces she'd known her whole life. Old Miss Thorne from the post, who'd given her peppermints as a child. The Kellum brothers, who ran the mill. Her father, near the back, his hat in his hands, his face as still as the stone. "Tonight," Donald said, "we honor the bonds that the moon has seen fit to bless." Rowan stepped up to the stone. Elara stepped up beside him. She could feel Mira somewhere behind her right shoulder, close enough that Elara could smell her perfume, the lavender one Elara had bought her for her birthday in the spring. "Rowan Kessler," Donald said, "you have come to the stone tonight to declare a mate." "I have," Rowan said. "The moon has shown you your heart." "It has." "Then speak her name, son. Speak it so the valley hears." And Rowan Kessler, son of Bern Kessler, grandson of Alden Kessler, the boy Elara Voss had kissed for the first time under the river bridge when she was 17, the man she had planned her whole adult life around. Rowan Kessler looked at her for the first time all night. He looked at her, and he said, "Mira Ashford." There are moments the body knows before the mind does. Elara's mind was still trying to make the words into other words. It was still trying to hear something else. It was still inside the second before, the second where everything she had been for 7 years was still true, and the vines on her hem still meant what they were supposed to mean. Her mind was a soft animal, refusing to come out of its den. Her body, though. Her body went cold from the soles of her feet up, like someone had poured a river through her. Her knees didn't give, but they thought about it. Her hands made fists that she would find, later, had cut 4 little half-moons into each palm. "I'm sorry, son," Donald said, and his voice had gone low and confused. "I need you to repeat that." "Mira Ashford," Rowan said again, louder this time. Mira stepped forward. She stepped forward out of the crowd, out of the place 3 steps behind Elara, where she had been walking the whole time. And she came up to the binding stone and she stood next to Rowan Kessler, and she put her small freckled hand flat on the granite. "I accept," Mira said. The meadow went silent. Not the soft silence a crowd goes when something sacred is happening. The other kind. The kind that happens when 2,000 people realize at once that they are watching a person get taken apart in public. "Elara," Mira said. Her voice was shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I've been trying for months, El. I swear I—" "Months," Elara said. It was the first word she had spoken since his name. "Please don't make this months. El, don't." Elara's voice didn't crack. That was what would haunt her later. That her voice didn't crack. That some part of her, some deep, cold, previously undiscovered part of her, had taken over her mouth before the rest of her knew what was happening. "Don't call me that. Don't say my name." Mira's eyes filled. "I loved you," Elara said. "I loved you since we were 9 years old. I know. I sat with you when your mother died, Mira. I know, El, please." "Don't." Elara turned to Rowan. She hadn't planned to. Her body just did it. She turned to him and she saw for the first time all night what his face really looked like, and she understood something that made her stomach turn over. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even nervous. Rowan Kessler was standing at the binding stone with his hand an inch from Mira Ashford's, and his face was the face of a man who had already decided, a long time ago, that Elara Voss was a problem he was going to solve tonight. "How long?" Elara said. Rowan didn't answer. "Rowan, how long?" Packmaster Donald cleared his throat. "Son, I think you owe the girl a year," Rowan said. The word landed in the meadow like a stone in a pond. A year. Elara had cooked him dinner every Sunday for a year. She had darned his socks a year. She had sat in his mother's kitchen a year and listened to his mother talk about grandchildren. She had taken her mother's dress out of the cedar chest and held it up against her body in the mirror a year ago and cried because she thought she was finally going to get to wear it. A year. A year of her life had been a theater, and every person in the meadow, every single person who was looking at her right now with their mouths slightly open, either had not known or had known and had said nothing. "A year," Elara said. "Elara," Rowan said, and his voice had something in it now, some first scratch of regret, too late and too small. "I didn't mean for it to—" "Don't. Let me explain." "There is nothing," Elara said, and her voice was very steady now, very steady and very quiet, the way the river got steady right before it went over the falls, "that you can explain." She looked out at the crowd. She looked for her father. Hale Voss was standing where he had been standing, at the back, his hat in his hands. His face was white. His jaw was set. He was looking at Rowan Kessler the way a carpenter looks at a board he's about to throw on the fire. But he didn't move. He didn't come forward. Nobody came forward. The elders stood at the stone and did not move. Old Miss Thorne did not move. The Kellum brothers did not move. 2,000 people stood in the meadow at the harvest binding of the Silver Pine Pack, and they watched Elara Voss in her mother's dress, and not one of them stepped into the circle. Not one. That's the part she would remember. Not Rowan's face, not Mira's tears, not even the word year. The stillness of the crowd, the weight of all those eyes that had known her whole life, and the way every single one of them slid off her face and onto the ground at the exact same moment, as if they'd practiced. In Hollowvale Valley, there was a word for this. It was an old word, and it wasn't used often, and it wasn't written down anywhere polite. When the pack stood around a wolf and pretended not to see her, the word for it was hollowed. To be hollowed was to be made not there. It was the oldest punishment the pack knew, and nobody had even had to vote on it. They had just done it, instinctively, the way a herd closes a gap around a sick animal. Elara Voss stood in the binding stone in her mother's dress, and she understood, with a cold clarity that felt, honestly, like the first true thing she had ever understood in her life, that she had never been one of them. Not really. Not ever. The pack had tolerated her the way a pack tolerates a quiet, useful thing, and the second she was inconvenient, they would pretend she had never existed at all. She looked at the stone. She put her hand on it, not to claim anyone, just to feel it. Cold granite under her palm, 400 years of other people's promises. The old stories said the stone remembered every hand that had ever touched it. Elara hoped in that moment, with a viciousness that surprised her, that the stone would remember hers, that the stone would remember she had been there tonight, because nobody else was going to. Then she took her hand off the rock. She turned. She walked out of the circle. Mira made a sound behind her. Not a word. A sound. The sound a person makes when they realize something is about to cost more than they thought it would. Rowan said her name once. Elara. Just the one time. She did not turn around for either of them. She walked down through the crowd, and the crowd parted for her the way water parts for a stone, and not one person reached out. Not one person touched her arm. Not one person said her name kindly. She passed old Miss Thorne, who would not lift her eyes from her own shoes. She passed the Kellum brothers, who had carried her on their shoulders at a summer fair when she was 6 years old, and neither of them looked up. She passed her father. Hale Voss was standing by the edge of the path with his hat crushed in his hands, and when she came up to him, his whole face caved in. "Honey," he said. His voice cracked on the word. Elara stopped. She looked at him. She loved him, fiercely, in that moment, more fiercely, maybe, than she had ever loved him, because he was the one person in the whole meadow whose face hadn't slid off hers. He was the only one still looking. "Dad," she said. Honey, let me, not tonight." "I can't, Dad. Not tonight. If you come after me tonight, I will say something to you that I will not be able to take back, and I don't want that. I don't want that for us, okay?" He put his hand on her cheek. His hand was trembling. His hand had never trembled in her life. "Okay," he said. "I'll come home." "When?" "I don't know." He nodded. He let her go. She walked past him, and she kept walking, and she went through the tree line at the edge of the meadow, and when the last lantern was behind her and the firelight was just aglow in the trees, she broke into a run. She ran. She ran until her lungs were a bright knot of pain, and her mother's dress was catching on the brambles and tearing along the vine pattern, and she did not stop. She ran the long way around the meadow, past the old cider press, past the cattle gate, down into the lower vineyards where the vines had already been cut back for winter and stood like black wire in rows across the slope. She ran until her legs refused to run anymore, and then she walked, gasping, her arms wrapped around her own ribs. The night up there was huge. The Hollowvale sky in late October was the blackest black you could stand under. The stars came down close enough that a person could almost believe she could reach one. Elara stumbled along the top of the vineyard row, and her breath came out in white plumes. And the farther she got from the bonfire, the colder the air got, and at some point, she did not know when, she realized she was crying. Not sobbing, just crying. Quietly, steadily, the way a gutter cries in a slow rain. She got halfway down the long slope before her knees gave out. She went down onto them in the dirt between two rows of vines. She put both her hands flat on the cold ground. She could feel every pebble through her mother's dress. She could feel the frost starting to come up through the soil. She bent forward until her forehead touched the earth, and she pressed it there, and she made a small, ugly, private sound that she would never, for the rest of her life, describe to anyone. She stayed like that for a long time. She did not hear him come. That was the first thing about him. She did not hear him come. Elara had grown up in the Silver Pine pack, which meant she had been hearing other wolves approach her since before she had language for it. A footstep on dry leaves 100 yards off. A shift in the wind. A held breath, somewhere upslope. She had always known when she was not alone, but she did not hear this man. She only knew he was there when a coat came down over her shoulders. It was a heavy coat, dark wool. It settled onto her back with a weight like a hand, and it smelled, she would remember this later, with an embarrassing precision, like cold stone and cedar smoke and something else she couldn't name, something that was not a smell so much as a warmth that went in under the wool and down her spine and came to rest in a place she hadn't known she was cold in. Elara did not turn around. She was still on her knees in the dirt. Her forehead was still against the ground. She had a perfect, terrible awareness that whoever had put the coat on her was standing 2 feet behind her and that they were enormous. She could feel the size of him the way you feel the size of a building without looking, and that they could, if they chose, do anything to her. She was out here alone. Her father thought she was walking off her feelings. Nobody in the valley would come looking for her tonight. Nobody in the valley would come looking for her for a long time, possibly ever again. She didn't move. She didn't have the strength to move. "Don't get up," the man said. His voice was low. It was a voice that did not raise itself, a voice that had never had to. It was a voice, she would think later, that was used to being listened to the first time. "I'm not going to touch you," he said. "I'm going to sit down a few feet away. If you want me to go, say the word and I'm gone. You won't see me again." There was a pause. She heard him move. She heard cloth against cloth and a soft sound of a man sitting down in cold dirt without caring that he was ruining whatever he was wearing. She could tell from the sound that he had sat down maybe 6 feet away, far enough that she could have stood up and run without his hand reaching her. He didn't say anything else. He just sat there. Elara kept her forehead pressed to the ground. Her breath steamed against the dirt. The coat on her shoulders was getting warmer from her body, or maybe from his. She couldn't tell, and she didn't want to think about which one it was. She could hear very faintly the bonfire still going in the meadow above, a mile off. Somebody, incredibly, had started the music again. The festival was continuing. Her rejection had been a 20-second interruption in the program, And now the Silverpine pack was back to drinking cider and laughing. A sound came out of her throat. It wasn't a sob. It was worse than a sob. It was a small, flat animal sound of a person who had just understood something too clearly. "Yeah," the man said softly. "I know." She lifted her head. She couldn't see him well. The moon was behind a cloud and the only light was starlight, and he was just a shape in the dark a few feet downslope, a big shape, sitting with his forearms on his knees, his hands loose, his head turned slightly away from her. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the vineyard. Courtesy, she realized. He was giving her the courtesy of not looking at her face while she was broken. That, more than the coat, more than the voice, was the thing that undid her. Because nobody in that valley, tonight, had given her the courtesy of not looking at her face while she was broken. 2,000 people had watched. 2,000 people had been, in their small way, eating her. And this stranger, whoever he was, had sat down in the dirt 6 feet away and turned his head so she could have her face to herself. "Who are you?" Elara said. Her voice came out cracked. She hadn't used it in a while. "Nobody you know," he said. "You're not from the valley." "No. You shouldn't be in the vineyards this late. They shoot trespassers in the vineyards this late." "Do they?" "In theory." A pause. She could hear, she thought, the faintest sound of something that might have been amusement. "I'll take my chances." She sat back on her heels. The coat nearly slid off her. She caught it with both hands and pulled it tight around her shoulders, and she realized, holding it, that the wool was finer than anything anyone in Hollowvale Valley owned. This was not a farmer's coat. This was not even a merchant's coat. This was a coat that had been made for somebody who did not, in the normal course of things, sit down in cold dirt. "Why did you give me your coat?" she said. "You were cold." "You don't know me." "No." "Then why?" There was a long pause. The stranger in the dark turned his head a quarter turn. Not enough to look at her, but enough that she knew he was thinking about it. "Because nobody else did," he said. Elara felt something move under her ribs. It was a very small thing. It was not forgiveness, and it was not hope, and it was not by any stretch the beginning of anything. It was just the first breath of a woman who had been holding her breath for a year and had not known she was holding it. She looked down at her hands. The 4 little half-moons in her palms were bleeding. She hadn't noticed. "I'm not going to be good company tonight," she said. "I didn't come here for company." "Why did you come here?" "I was walking," he said. "Just walking. Just a walking. In the Silverpine vineyards in the middle of the night. In October." "You're lying." "Yes." She laughed. It surprised her. A little raw bark of a laugh, and it hurt coming out. It hurt because her throat was so tight, but it was a laugh. She had not expected to laugh tonight. She had not expected to make any sound again. Really, that wasn't the sound of a dying thing. "Why are you really here?" she said. The stranger was quiet for a long moment. "I came down for the festival," he said. "I heard there was going to be a binding tonight." "You're not Pack." "No." "Then why would you come to our binding?" "I wasn't coming for the binding. I was coming for something else. I'd been told there was somebody worth meeting in the valley this autumn." "Somebody worth meeting?" "That's what I was told." "By who?" "That's a longer story than tonight has room for." Elara turned her head to look at him properly. She still couldn't see him well, but she could see the line of his jaw against the stars, and the shape of his shoulders, and the perfect, unnatural stillness of the way he sat. He did not fidget. He did not breathe hard. He sat in the dirt the way a mountain sat in the dirt. And something in the back of her head, the old part of her head, the wolf part, the part that had been hearing footsteps since she was a child, was telling her very quietly that the man sitting 6 feet from her in the dark was not an ordinary thing. "I didn't find them," he said. "The person I was looking for. I walked the festival for an hour. Nothing. I was walking back to my horse and I came down along the ridge and I heard somebody crying in the vines." "That was me." "Yes." "I wasn't crying." "I know. I'm sorry." "I wasn't crying. I was—" She stopped. She didn't know what she had been doing. She didn't have a word for it. "I was just Down here, she said. I didn't know where else to go. I know, he said. Something in the way he said it made her look at him again. Harder this time. It was a strange way to agree with a person. I know. Like he meant it. Like he had himself, at some point, not known where else to go and had gone to the cold ground and put his forehead against it and waited for something. She pulled the coat tighter. What's your name? She said. If I tell you my name, he said, it'll change how you talk to me. That's a coward's answer. Yes. Tell me your name. He didn't. Not right away. He looked out at the vineyard. The moon was starting to come out from behind the cloud now, and she could see more of him. A strong profile, dark hair going back from a high forehead, a coat that was not the coat he had put on her shoulders, but another one, darker, higher at the throat. He was younger than his voice. Not young, but younger than a voice like that had any right to be. I'll tell you my name, he said, if you tell me yours. Elara Voss. Elara Voss, he repeated, and the way he said it was not the way anyone in the valley said it. He said it like he was laying it down carefully, like he was putting it somewhere he intended to come back to. Yours, she said. He opened his mouth. Then, somewhere up the slope, back toward the festival, a horn went up, a long, low horn, the kind the elders used to call the pack to attention. It rolled down through the vineyards and shook the frost off the vines. And after it, another sound. Voices. A lot of voices. Not happy voices. The kind of voices a crowd makes when something it thought was over is starting up again. The stranger's head came up. For the first time since he'd sat down, he looked directly at her. Elara saw his eyes in the moonlight for the first time. They were not the eyes of a man. They were not the eyes of a wolf either. Not any wolf she had ever seen. They were paler than they had any right to be. Silver, almost, or the color of frost at first light, and they held hers with a weight that made her breath catch in her chest. They're calling you back, he said. I'm not going back. Not tonight. But you will. His voice had changed, very slightly. Something in it had gone careful. Elara Voss, listen to me. What happened up there tonight? That's not the last of it. You understand that, don't you? I don't want to think about up there. I know, but you have to. Because I can tell you right now, sitting in this dirt, this isn't over. Not for him. Not for her. Not for the pack. They did something to you tonight that they don't have a word for. And men who do something they don't have a word for either kneel and beg for it to be forgotten, or they make sure the person they did it to is never heard from again. Do you understand me? She stared at him. Who are you? She whispered. He didn't answer. The horn went up again, closer now. Somebody was coming down from the festival. A lantern bobbed among the vines a quarter-mile away. She could hear men's voices calling a name. Elara. Elara Voss. The pack was coming. Not to help her. She knew, with a cold that went deeper than the ground under her knees, that the pack was not coming to help her. The pack was coming because Rowan Kessler had had an hour to think about what a rejected woman in the dark might do to his new life. And Rowan Kessler did not like loose ends. The stranger stood up. He stood up in one smooth motion, and she understood, looking at the height of him against the stars, that he was even larger than she had thought. He looked down at her, and his face in the moonlight was not a cruel face, but it was not a kind face either. It was a face that had made decisions, a lot of them, and had not asked anyone's permission. Elara, he said. Yes. Do you want them to find you here? She thought about it. She thought about Rowan Kessler coming down the vineyard row with a lantern and finding her on her knees in the dirt in her mother's dress with a stranger's coat on her shoulders. She thought about what his face would do. She thought about what Mira's face would do. She thought about what the elders would say. The poor thing, she ran off. She wasn't in her right mind. We should have watched her. Somebody should have watched her. And she thought about what that story would mean for the rest of her life in this valley. A sad girl. A broken girl. A girl who had to be watched. No, she said. Then stand up. She stood up. Her legs barely held. She let the coat fall around her like a cape. The lantern in the vines was closer now. She could hear, with terrible clarity, Rowan Kessler's voice calling her name. The stranger reached out a hand. He did not grab her. He held it out, palm up, waiting. You decide, he said. She looked at his hand. She looked at the lantern coming down the row. She thought about her father's face at the back of the meadow. She thought about the vines her mother had stitched. She thought about Mira's freckles and Rowan's starched collar and the old ugly rock that was supposed to remember every hand that had ever touched it. And she thought, with a clarity that was not grief anymore, that was not even anger anymore, that was something colder and older and far more useful. I am done being a thing that people decide about. She put her hand in his. His hand closed around hers, and the moment it did, something under her skin, something she had never felt before, something older than her, something older, maybe, than the pack itself, lit up like a struck match and ran the length of her arm and settled, humming, at the base of her throat. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her with an expression she could not read. Something in his face had gone very still. "What was that?" she whispered. He didn't answer her. He just tightened his hand around hers, very slightly, and turned her away from the lantern, away from the horn, away from the valley, away from every person who had stood in that meadow and pretended not to see her. And he led her down into the dark of the vineyard, where the vines stood in rows like black wire, and the frost cracked under their boots, and the stars came down close enough, almost, to touch. Behind them, somewhere in the rows, Rowan Kessler was still calling her name. He would call it, Elara understood, for a long, long time, and she would not answer. They moved through the vineyard like two shadows that had agreed on a direction without saying it out loud. Elara kept her hand in his longer than she meant to. She told herself it was because the ground was uneven and she didn't want to fall. That was a lie, and she knew it was a lie, and she didn't let go anyway. The hum under her skin had not stopped. It had settled, the way a struck bell settles, still vibrating, still there, just quieter. Every time his thumb shifted against the back of her hand, the bell rang again. The lantern behind them was getting louder. Rowan was calling her name in a voice that was starting to crack around the edges. He wasn't alone. She could hear at least two other men with him now. The Kellum brothers, probably. The same brothers who wouldn't meet her eyes an hour ago. Funny. They'd found their voices when it was time to hunt her. "This way," the stranger said. He pulled her left, between two rows, into a narrow track where the vines grew thicker and the frost hadn't been broken yet. Elara stumbled. Her dress caught on a wire trellis, and she heard another seam tear, up near her ribs this time. She didn't look down. She couldn't afford to look down. "I can't see," she whispered. "You don't need to." The ground. Step where I step. So she did. She matched her boots to his. He was walking slower than his legs wanted him to. She could feel that, the way an animal can feel another animal pacing itself, and she knew he was doing it for her. It bothered her, a little, being slowed down for. But she didn't have the strength to be proud tonight. They came out at the bottom of the slope, where the vineyard ended in a low stone wall, and beyond the wall was the old wagon track that ran along the river. In daylight, from the top of the hill, the track looked like a thin silver scratch in the dark fields. In the moonlight, up close, it was nothing but two frozen wheel ruts and a spine of crushed grass between them. A horse was standing there, ending. Elara had expected a horse somehow. She didn't know why. She just had. But she had not expected this horse. It was black. Not the brown black of a workhorse, the other kind of black. The kind that ate light. It stood 17 hands at the shoulder, maybe more. And when it turned its head to look at them, she saw its eye catch the moon, and she had to work consciously to keep her face from doing anything. It was not the horse of a man who walked down into valleys to see festivals. It was the horse of a man who rode into valleys because valleys were smaller than him. "Yours?" she said. "Mine. I know what he is. He's beautiful. He's a nuisance, but he's fast." He put a hand on the horse's neck, and the animal lowered its head. And something about the gesture, the easy, absent-minded kindness of it, did something to her chest. "Come on, up you go." "I'm not getting on that horse." "No? I don't even know your name." He looked at her. The moon was full on his face now, and she got her first real look at him, and her stomach did something she had no language for. She had been right earlier. He was younger than his voice, maybe 30, maybe a little more. Black hair a little too long at the collar, like he was past due for a cut and didn't care. A long jaw. A mouth that didn't give anything away. A small white line of a scar cutting down through his left eyebrow. Old, the kind you forgot you had. And those eyes. That pale, wrong, silver gray that made her think of a winter lake the second before it froze. Kael, he said. Kael. Yes. Kael what? Just Kael. For tonight. That's not how names work. It is for tonight. Up on the ridge, somebody shouted, "Not Rowan this time," a voice she didn't know. And then a dog, a hunting dog from the sound, started barking, short, sharp bursts of noise that meant I have a trail. Elara's stomach went cold. "They brought dogs," she said. "Yes." "Kessler brought dogs for me." "Yes, Elara." She stared at him. "He brought dogs for me, Kael. I know. I haven't done anything. I know. I haven't done anything, and the man I was going to marry, he's Elara." Kael didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The word came out with a weight that stopped her throat. "I need you to get on this horse. You can have the rest of your feelings about this somewhere that isn't 600 yards from a dog. Up." She got on the horse. She didn't know how, really. Her mother's dress wasn't made for it, and her legs were shaking, but his hand was at her elbow and then at her waist, and somehow she was up. Side saddle, clumsy, one leg hooked over the pommel. And he swung up behind her in a single motion that made her understand he had done this more times than she could imagine. His arm came around her, steady, not tight. His other hand took the reins. "Hold on to his mane," he said, close to her ear. "Not the saddle. The mane. Won't it hurt him? He'll live. Kael? Hold on, Elara." She fisted her hand in the horse's mane. Kael made a small sound, but not a click, not a word, something older than both. And the horse went. It did not run. Running wasn't the word. The horse poured itself down the wagon track, long, low ground-eating strides, and the vineyard wall was gone in 3 heartbeats, and the river was suddenly beside them, a black ribbon of sound, and Elara's hair was coming out of its braid, and her face was numb from the wind, and somewhere behind them the dog was still barking, but the dog was getting further and further away, and in a minute she couldn't hear it at all. She realized halfway down the river road that she was laughing, not happy laughing. The other kind. The kind that comes out of a person when they've been so scared for so long that their body finally gives up and tries a new sound. A bright, cracked, unhinged laugh, jolted out of her by the rhythm of the horse, and she couldn't stop it. She laughed until her ribs hurt. She laughed until she was crying again. She laughed until Kael's arm tightened, just a little, just enough to say, "I know, I've got you. Keep laughing if you need to." He didn't say anything. He just rode. They rode for a long time. He stopped at a place she didn't recognize. That wasn't saying much. Elara had left the valley exactly twice in her life. Once for university, a mistake she'd corrected after a semester, and once with her father to bury her mother's ashes at the coast. She didn't know the country north of Hollowvale. She knew it was wilder. She knew there were ranges up there that didn't belong to any pack, and others that belonged to packs nobody in Silverpine liked to talk about. That was the end of her knowledge. The place Kael stopped at was a hunter's cabin, or something that had started life as one. It sat in a clearing ringed by black pines, and somebody had added a second room to it at some point, and a chimney, and a proper shuttered window. And it was the kind of place that looked from the outside like nothing, and from the inside, she suspected, like a lot more than nothing. The snow hadn't come yet this low down, but the air was sharp enough that she could taste metal in it. Kael swung down first. He held up his hand. She took it, got off the horse more clumsily than she'd gotten on. Her legs buckled when they hit the ground. He caught her elbow, steadied her, let go the instant she was upright. He was very careful, she was starting to notice, about when he touched her and when he didn't, like a man walking past a sleeping animal. "Is this yours?" she asked. "It's nobody's. There are a few of these. People use them." "Hunters? Sometimes? And other times?" He didn't answer that. He tied the horse to a beam under a low overhang, pulled a bag of feed out of somewhere, said a quiet word to the animal that Elara didn't catch, and then walked to the door of the cabin. He put his hand flat against the wood, and he stood there for a full second with his head down, checking something. She didn't know what. Then he pushed the door open. "Go in," he said. "I'll get a fire. Don't touch the shelves." "The shelves?" "Just don't touch them." She went in. It was colder inside than out. There was a small iron stove in the corner and a narrow cot against one wall and a table made from a slab of split pine, and there were, yes, shelves, two long shelves running along the back wall, and on the shelves were jars. A lot of jars. Elara did not look closely at the jars. She could already tell from the corner of her eye that some of the jars had things in them that she didn't want to know about. Kyle came in behind her carrying an armload of split wood. He crouched at the stove. His hands moved with a casual competence. Kindling, flint, a breath. And in under a minute there was fire. He did not look at her while he did it. He was still giving her the courtesy of not looking at her face. Elara sat down on the edge of the cot. She pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. The wool was still warm from him. She realized, with a slow, ridiculous embarrassment, that she had been wearing it for 2 hours, and that it was heavier than she'd understood, and that it smelled, up close, like somebody whose life she could not begin to picture. "Kyle," she said. Who are you really?" He fed another stick to the stove. "I told you." "You told me Kyle. That's not an answer. That's a syllable. It's the only answer you're getting tonight. That's not fair." "No, it isn't." He closed the stove door. He straightened up, and the cabin was small enough that he had to slightly duck under the beam in the middle of the ceiling. "Elara, listen. There is a version of tonight where I sit down across from you and tell you everything I know about everything, and by morning you hate me, because everything I know is not a kind thing. There is another version of tonight where I keep my mouth shut and let you sleep. And in the morning we see what kind of person you are when you've had 6 hours. I'm the same person when I've had 6 hours." "No, you aren't." He almost smiled. "Almost. Nobody is. I don't sleep in strangers' cabins. Tonight you do. Kyle, or I can take you home." That stopped her. "Would you?" she said. "If I asked." "Yes." "Really?" "Yes, Elara." She looked at him for a long time. The fire was just starting to push some heat into the room. The shadows on his face moved and did not move. "I can't go home," she said quietly. "I know. I don't mean I'm scared to. I mean I can't. My father will let me in, and he'll feed me, and he'll sit across the table from me, and he'll be kind. And every single morning for the rest of his life he'll look at me over the toast, and he'll be thinking my daughter, the girl who got hollowed at the harvest binding, and I will know he's thinking it, and it will kill both of us slowly." Kale was quiet. "And Rowan's coming back for me," she said. "Isn't he?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're a problem he hasn't solved." She laughed. It was not a good laugh. "I'm not a problem, Elara." Kale finally sat down. He pulled the single wooden chair over and turned it backwards and sat on it with his forearms on the back. And now his eyes were on her, finally, directly. "You are the worst kind of problem a man like Rowan Kessler can have. You are a woman he did something ugly to, in public, in front of the people whose opinion of him he needs for the rest of his life. And the people in that valley did a thing tonight that they can almost live with. They stood there and didn't interfere. They can tell themselves that wasn't a choice. They can tell themselves they were just watching a binding. They can't tell themselves that tomorrow, though, if you're still breathing and still talking, because then they'll have to pick. Either they were cruel to you or you were a liar, and the whole valley would rather you be a liar." She stared at the floor. "I don't lie. I know. I've never lied. Not about anything important. I don't even lie to my father when it would make everybody's life easier. Ask anybody in—" She stopped, because there was nobody she could ask. That was the joke, wasn't it? The pack had just proved that there was nobody in that entire valley she could ask. "You said he brought dogs for me," she said. "He did." "Kyle, why would a man I've known my whole life, a man I was going to marry, bring dogs for me?" Kale didn't answer right away. He was looking at her hands. She realized slowly that her palms were still bleeding where she'd cut them with her own nails at the binding stone. 4 small half-moons in each hand. She'd forgotten. He got up. He went to one of the shelves she wasn't supposed to touch, ran his finger along a row of jars, took one down, and brought it over. He crouched in front of her. He didn't sit on the cot next to her. He crouched on the floorboards, close enough to reach, far enough away that she could still decide. "Give me your hands," he said. "I can— Elara, give me your hands." She gave him her hands. He uncorked the jar. Something in it smelled like pine resin, and something sharp she didn't know. He poured a little into his own palm, rubbed his hands together to warm it, and then, carefully, the way a man handles something that might break, he took her right hand in both of his and spread the salve across the half-moons. His hands were huge. His hands were warm. His hands were, she noticed with a slight dizzy shock, calloused in places that were not the places a man's hands normally got calloused. Across the pads of the fingers, along the edge of the palm, old deep calluses from holding something for years at a time. A sword, she thought. It was a ridiculous thought. She pushed it away. "Rowan didn't send dogs out for you, Elara," Kale said quietly, working the salve into her skin. "Not the woman. He sent dogs out for the story. There's a difference." "Explain it." "The woman he can ignore, the story he can't. Because the story is going to travel. It's going to get out of the valley. It's going to get into the trade towns. It's going to get to Blackridge. And from Blackridge, it's going to get to the capital. And somewhere along the way, a man who is not Rowan Kessler is going to hear it, and he is going to say, 'Interesting. Rowan knows that.' Rowan has known that since before he opened his mouth at the stone tonight. And he made a calculation. He calculated that the one woman in the valley who could make that story real was the same woman who loved him enough to never imagine he could lie. So he lied, and he waited, and he made his move when you had a dress on and 2,000 witnesses. Because 2,000 witnesses is just enough people that everybody will agree to look away. That's the math." He moved to her other hand. She watched the top of his head. His hair was very black. There was, she noticed, a single gray strand at his temple. She was surprised by how much comfort she took from it. "You're saying he planned this," she said. "Yes. For a year. For a year." "Why?" "I don't know yet." He finished with her left hand and set it back down on her lap gently. "But I'm going to find out." "Why are you going to find out?" He looked up at her. And the look he gave her was not the look of a man who had stumbled into a woman in a vineyard. It was the look of a man who had been looking for her for a long time. "Because he cost me something," Kyle said. "Tonight, when he did what he did to you." "He doesn't know you." "No." "Then how did he cost you something?" Kale stood up slowly. He recorked the jar. He put it back on the shelf. He stood with his back to her for a second, one hand flat on the wood, and she saw his shoulders move, just once, like a man making himself let something go. "I'll tell you in the morning," he said. "Kyle, in the morning, Elara. I promise. Sleep. There's a blanket in the chest at the foot of the cot. I'll be outside." "Outside. It's a small cabin. It's freezing. I've slept in colder." "Kyle." He turned, his hand on the door. He looked at her one more time. The firelight made his eyes look less silver and more like actual human eyes, gray, tired. The eyes of a man who had ridden a long way tonight and was going to ride further in the morning. "Bar the door behind me," he said. "You're coming back in." "In the morning. Bar the door, Elara, please." He went out. She sat on the cot for a long time before she got up and barred the door. When she did, her hand was shaking. She didn't sleep. She told herself, lying on the cot with the coat pulled up over her and the fire going down to embers, that she would sleep for 2 hours and then wake up and decide what to do. She closed her eyes. She listened to the wind move against the shutters. She listened to the horse, outside, shift its weight under the overhang. She listened for a long time, for the sound of Kyle breathing somewhere near the door, and she did not hear it. Not once, not in 4 hours. And she didn't know if that was because he was far away or because he was the kind of man whose breathing you didn't hear. She listened mostly to her own head. Her head had a lot to say. It had a lot to say about Mira's face at the binding stone, about the way Mira had cried, the little hitch in her voice, the "I tried to tell you, Elle," and how Elara, replaying it now in the dark, could hear under the tears a second voice, flatter, colder, a voice that was not sorry. She thought about the months she had poured herself into that friendship like water into a cracked cup. She thought about the spring run when she was 16, Mira on her bed, "You're going to be legendary." She wondered when exactly Mira had stopped meaning it, whether she had ever meant it, whether the whole friendship, all the way back to the skinned rabbits in Mira's father's kitchen, had been one long, patient theater by a girl who had always wanted what Elara had and had simply decided at some point to take it. That one almost broke her. She turned over on the cot and pressed her face into the coat and breathed in, hard, the smell of cedar smoke and cold stone, and she made herself stop. Not forever. Just for tonight. Tonight, she told herself, she was going to survive until morning. Everything else could wait. She slept, after all, a little. A thin, twitchy sleep. In it, she was back in the meadow, in her mother's dress, and this time when she turned to look at her father, his face was gone. Smooth, blank, featureless, like somebody had wiped him off a page. And she woke up with her heart slamming, sitting up on the cot, so fast she cracked her head on the low beam over it. The fire was almost out. The shutters were gray, not black. And there were voices outside. Men's voices. Low. 3 of them. Not Kael. Elara went so still on the cot that she could hear her own blood. Sure, this is the one. It's the only one within 10 miles. Could be the other one. The other one's burned down. Boy, keep up. Okay? A pause, then, whose horse? Elara's stomach dropped into her heels. Don't know, one of the voices said. Not a farm horse. That's not a farm horse. That's a lord's horse. A lord's horse in a hunter's cabin. Kessler didn't say anything about a lord. Kessler didn't say anything about a lot of things. They were right outside. Elara could hear their boots on the frozen leaves. She could hear the horse, Kael's horse, moving a little, uneasy. She could hear one of the men walk around the side of the cabin, walk past the shutters so close that she could hear the soft catch of his coat on a nail. He stopped. He was, she thought, pressing his ear to the wall. She did not breathe. "Hello, the cabin," one of the voices called out. She did not answer. "We're not here to hurt anybody. We're looking for a young woman. Dark hair, about 5'6", wearing a white dress. She's not in trouble. We're friends of her family. Her father's worried about her." That was a lie. She knew the voice. It was Joss Halloran, one of Rowan's cousins. He had grown up 4 houses down from her. He was not a friend of her family. He was the man who had once, when they were both 13, thrown a dead crow at her on a dare. "Hello, the cabin!" Still, Elara did not move. She slid very slowly off the cot and onto the floorboards. She crawled on her hands and knees away from the door. Her palms burned where the salve had done its work. She got to the far wall. She pressed her back against it. Her eyes went, without her meaning them to the shelves. The shelves she wasn't supposed to touch. She could see them properly now, in the gray half-light. The jars were labeled. She couldn't read the labels from here, but she could see on the bottom shelf something that wasn't a jar. Something long, wrapped in oilcloth. She did not let herself think about it. Outside, the voices were closer to the door now. "Somebody's been in here," Joss was saying. "The stove's warm. Break it." "The door?" "Yes, the door." "Joss, if this is the wrong cabin, then we apologize and we fix the door. Break it." Elara's hand, without her asking it to, reached for the oilcloth. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just reached, and the cloth came away, and under it was, of course it was, a knife, not a kitchen knife. A knife the length of her forearm, straight, single-edged, with a worn leather grip and a blade that had been sharpened so many times the belly of it had gone narrow. It was the knife of a man who used it. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. She crawled back across the floorboards to the side of the door. She put her back flat against the wall next to it. She held the knife in both hands. Ridiculously, she knew, like a child holding a sword. And she watched the door, and she tried to remember how to breathe. A shoulder hit the door from outside. The frame shook. The bar rattled. Again. Another hit. The bar cracked. "One more!" Elara's hand was shaking so hard she was going to drop the knife. She switched it to her right hand. She tightened her grip until her palms screamed under the cuts. She thought very clearly. The thought came out of her with the kind of clarity she had not had once in the last 7 years of her life. If the first man through this door is Joss Halloran, I am going to put this into him before he sees me. She was going to. She didn't know she had it in her, but she was going to. The third hit came. The bar broke. The door swung open a foot, then caught on something, and then swung open the rest of the way, and a man came in backward. Not Joss, not anyone she knew, just a man, one of the Halloran cousins she couldn't name, stumbling in because he'd put his whole shoulder into the last hit and the door had given before he was ready for it. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking back at the door. She took a step toward him. The knife came up in her hand. She didn't plan it. Her arm planned it. Her arm had decided, somewhere between the barn and the cot and the shelves she wasn't supposed to touch, that it was done waiting for permission. "Inside!" the man shouted. "She's not... Hold on! The stove's..." He turned. He saw her. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened. His hand went to his belt. There was something at his belt, she couldn't see what. And Elara Voss, who had never hit a living creature in her life, who had wept over the rabbit she'd helped Mira Ashford skin when they were 11, took one more step and swung the knife. She didn't swing it well. She'd never held one. She swung it the way a person swings a stick at a wasp, a wide, panicked, awful arc, and it caught the man across the forearm he put up to block her. The blade bit. Not deep. Deep enough. He made a sound that was not a scream, a low sound, and he fell back against the doorframe with his arm clutched to his chest. "Grab her!" he was shouting. "Grab her!" Two more men came in behind him. Joss Halloran was the first. He took one look at her. Her face, the knife, the dress, and she saw his expression do something complicated. A flicker of surprise and then, under it, a look that was almost pleased, like a man who had found exactly what he'd hoped to find. "Well, there you are," Joss said softly. "Look at you, Voss girl. Look at you with a knife." "Get out of my cabin," Elara said. Her voice did not crack. It was somehow the one thing about her that had not cracked all night. "Your cabin," Joss said. He smiled. His teeth were very white. "Sweetheart, this isn't your cabin. This isn't anybody's cabin. Put the knife down. We're taking you home." "I'm not going home." "You're going home, Voss girl, one way or the other. Your daddy wants you home. Rowan wants you home. Mira, poor Mira, she cried herself sick last night. Did you know that? Poor thing, she feels just awful about what happened." "Don't say her name." Joss's smile widened. "That's what I thought," he said. "Come on, put it down. You're going to cut yourself, or one of us, and that's not the story we want going around." He stepped toward her. Elara stepped back. She was against the wall. There was nowhere to step to. Her heel hit the leg of the cot. Joss took another step, slow, easy. A man who had done this before. His hand came out palm up, the way a man reaches for a frightened animal. "Put the knife down, Elara. Don't touch me. Nobody wants to touch you. Nobody in this cabin wants to touch you. We just want to take you home, and you and me can have a little talk on the way. And by the time we get to the valley, this whole thing is going to be..." He lunged. He was fast. She wasn't ready. His hand closed on her wrist, the one holding the knife, and his grip was like iron, and he twisted, and the knife came out of her hand and clattered to the floor, and then his other hand was in her hair, hard, and he was pulling her toward him. "There we go," he hissed, close to her ear. "There we go. Let's not make this hard." The door behind him exploded. That was the only word for it. Exploded. There was a sound like a tree going down, and the frame of the doorway tore, wood splintering up the jamb. And something came into the cabin the way weather comes into a cabin. Fast, dark, taking up the whole space at once. And Joss Halloran did not even finish his sentence. 1 second, his hand was in her hair. The next second, his hand wasn't in her hair, and Joss Halloran was pinned to the back wall of the cabin with his feet 6 inches off the floorboards and Kyle's forearm across his throat. Elara staggered back against the cot. She had not seen Kyle move. She had seen him go from the doorway to Joss, and she had not seen the step between them. That was not a thing a man did. "Joss Halloran," Kyle said. His voice was very quiet. It was the same voice he had used in the vineyard. It was the voice of a man who did not, in the ordinary course of things, raise himself. Except now the voice had something in it that had not been there in the vineyard. A thin, cold edge. The edge of a thing that had been held in check and now was not. Joss made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a man trying to breathe through a forearm. I'm going to ask you a question, Kael said. You're going to answer it. If you don't answer it or if you lie, I'm going to find that interesting. Do you want me to find you interesting, Joss Halloran? Joss shook his head, as much as he could, with his throat pinned. Good, Kael said. Here's the question. Who sent you? The other two men were frozen in the doorway. One of them, the one she'd cut, had gone gray and was leaning on the frame with his arm clutched to his chest. The other was staring at Kael with an expression that Elara would remember for the rest of her life, because she had never seen a grown man look like that. He looked like a child who had opened a cupboard and found something inside it that wasn't supposed to be in a cupboard. Rowan, Joss croaked. Rowan sent us. Rowan Kessler. Yes. To do what? Bring her back. Try again. Joss's eyes rolled. Kael hadn't pushed harder. He didn't need to. There was something about the way Kael was standing that had gone through Joss Halloran like cold water. Bring her back, Joss whispered. Bring her back quiet. That's all. That's all, I swear. Quiet. Quiet. He said, quiet. And if quiet wasn't possible, Joss did not answer. Kael leaned in. He did not move his arm. He just leaned his face a little closer. Elara could not see Kael's face from where she stood. She could only see Joss Halloran's and the color Joss Halloran's face was going. If quiet wasn't possible, Joss, then, yes, then not alive. The cabin went completely silent. Elara's knees went. She sat down on the cot. She sat down on the cot because her legs stopped, and she sat there with her hands in her lap, and she looked at Joss Halloran, whom she had known since she was 6 years old, whom she had played tag with in the pumpkin fields behind the old Kessler barn, and she thought, very simply, Rowan told him to kill me. Rowan told him to kill me if I wasn't quiet. The information did not fit in her head yet. She put it down gently at the edge of her mind, like a heavy stone, to come back to. Kael let go of Joss's throat. Joss crumpled. He slid down the wall and landed on the floor in a heap, and his hand went to his neck and he coughed, a wet, raw coughing. Kael turned. He looked at the two men in the doorway. Out, he said. They ran, both of them. The one with the cut arm left a smear of blood on the frame going through. Elara heard them crashing through the trees, not toward their horses, just away, any direction, the way men run from something they don't have words for. Joss was still on the floor. Kael looked down at him. Joss Halloran, he said. Stand up. Joss stood up. He was shaking. Go back to the valley, Kael said. Find Rowan Kessler. Tell him exactly what happened in this cabin tonight. Tell him the man who was in it. Describe the horse. Describe the coat. He'll know. I don't know who you are. No, but he will. Joss swallowed. You're letting me go. Yes. Why? Because I want him to know I'm coming. Kael stepped aside. Joss Halloran went past him, past Elara on the cot, past the bloody doorframe and out into the cold morning. He didn't run, at first. He walked. He walked the way a man walks who has been told he can go and can't quite believe it. Then, about 20 feet from the cabin, he broke into a run, and he did not look back. Kael watched him go. He stood in the broken doorway for a long moment with his hands at his sides and his shoulders very still. Then he closed the door, what was left of it, and he turned and looked at Elara. She was holding the knife again. She didn't remember picking it up. It was on her lap, across her knees, and her hands were folded on top of it. Kael looked at the knife. He looked at her. Are you hurt? He said. No. Elara. No. He crossed the room. He knelt down in front of her, not crouched this time, all the way down, one knee on the floorboards. He did not touch her. He put his hands on his own thighs, palms up, where she could see them. I'm sorry, he said. I should not have left you alone. You were outside. I was half a mile out. I was reading the ground by the river. I wanted to know how far behind us they were. I got it wrong. You came back. Not fast enough. You came back, Kael. He closed his eyes. And Elara, who had spent the night being steadied by him, being held up by him, being quietly and patiently kept alive by him, saw something she had not seen yet, the small, human, breakable thing under the stillness. His jaw worked. His hand, on his own thigh, closed into a fist and opened again. He was angry. He was more than angry. He was furious in a quiet, deep, structural way that had nothing to do with Joss Halloran and everything to do with himself. "Kyle," she said. Look at me." He looked at her. "You told me last night that he planned it," she said. "Rowan, that he planned it for a year. You told me he cost you something, and you said you'd tell me in the morning." "I did." "It's morning." He looked at the window. The shutters were still closed, but the line of gray under them had gone pink. "So it is," he said. "Tell me." He was quiet for a long second. Then he said, "My name isn't Kyle." "I know." "You know?" "I knew last night." A ghost of a smile moved across his face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man watching something he had been dreading for a long time arrive on schedule. "My name," he said, "is Kyle Draven." She did not move. She had heard the name. Of course she had heard the name. Every person in every pack from the coast to the inland ranges had heard the name. Kyle Draven, who had come up out of nothing at 18 and taken the Thornfell Range in a single winter. Kyle Draven, who had unified the 6 northern packs in 3 years and the 6 eastern packs in 2 more. Kyle Draven, who wore no crown because he did not need one, because at 31 years old he held more territory than any man had held in the living memory of any wolf, in any valley, in any direction, and because he had done it, they said, without ever once losing a fight. Kyle Draven, the Alpha King. Elara Voss sat on a cot in a hunter's cabin with the dead man's knife on her lap, and she looked at the Alpha King of every territory in the known world kneeling on a floorboard in front of her, and the thing she said, because her mouth moved before her mind did, was, "Oh." And Kyle Draven, the Alpha King, the man whose name the whole world knew, the man Rowan Kessler had calculated to a hair and come up one night short of, put his face in his hands and laughed. One small, tired, unguarded laugh. The laugh of a man who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just for 1 second been allowed to set it down. "Yes," he said into his hands. "Oh." Then he lowered his hands and he looked at her, and his eyes were not silver anymore. They were just gray, a tired man's eyes. And he said very quietly, "Rowan Kessler didn't choose Mira Ashford over you, Elara. He was told to, a year ago, by somebody who wanted to make sure that by the time I got to this valley, looking for the woman I'd been told was here, the woman the seers at the Capitol have been telling me about for 2 years, the woman whose name I did not know until last night, there wouldn't be a woman left to find." The cabin was very quiet. Outside, somewhere, the horse stamped once, hard, against the frozen ground. The horse stamped again, and Elara heard the sound the way you hear a clock in an empty house. Too loud, too exact. The only real thing in a room full of things that had stopped making sense. "Say that again," she said. Kale was still on one knee in front of her. He didn't move. "Rowan Kessler was told to—" "No, not that part. The other part." She set the knife down on the cot next to her, very carefully, the way you set down something you no longer trust. "The part about me." He looked at her for a long second. "The seers at the Capitol have been telling me about a woman for 2 years, he said. "They don't give names. They never give names. They can't. It's not how it works. They give pieces. Pieces of a person. The shape of her life. The edges of the things that are going to happen to her. 2 years ago, they told me there was a woman in the northern valleys who carried the other half of something I was carrying. They said I wouldn't find her easily. They said somebody was going to try to hide her from me. And they said, 'This is the part I'm telling you because you asked me to say it again.' They said I wouldn't know her until I saw her on her knees in the dirt." Elara felt something cold go up her spine and sit there. "I don't believe in seers," she said. "That's all right. I don't either, most days." "Then why?" "Because they've been right," Kale said simply. "Every time. For 8 years. They told me about the Thornfell winter before I took it. They told me about the Blackridge Gate. They told me the name of the man who tried to put a knife in my back in Cold Hollow 6 months before he tried. And I knew him, and I liked him, and I was wrong about him, and they were right. So when they told me about you, I listened, Not because I believe, because the alternative is I don't listen, and somewhere a woman pays for it. But you didn't have my name. No. And you came down to the festival anyway. I came down to the festival because I had run out of valleys. I have been in 17 valleys in the last 16 months. Every autumn festival from the coast to the East Range. Looking. For a woman on her knees. Yes. That's a stupid way to look for someone. Yes, Kyle said, and his mouth did that almost smile again. It is. Elara put a hand over her eyes. She sat like that for a long time. The cabin smelled like blood. There was a smear of it on the doorframe from the man she'd cut, and pine resin, and the salve Kyle had put on her palms, and under all of it, faintly, the warm animal smell of the horse through the broken door. Her head was not working well. She could feel it trying to work and failing. Her mother's dress was torn at the hem and the ribs and the shoulder, and at some point in the last 10 minutes, her hair had come completely undone, and she was sitting in a stranger's cabin listening to the most powerful man alive tell her that he had been looking for her for 2 years. None of that was the part of it that frightened her. The part that frightened her was smaller. Kyle, she said from behind her hand. Who told Rowan? He didn't answer. Who told Rowan Kessler a year ago that the Alpha King was going to come to this valley looking for a woman? Who knew to start hiding me a whole year before you even started looking here? Kyle was quiet. You see why I'm asking, she said. I see why you're asking. Because that person would have had to know 2 things. They would have had to know you were listening to the seers, and they would have had to know what the seers were saying. And the seers, you just told me, they don't give names. So this person knew enough to guess, knew enough about you to guess what you would do when a seer said Northern Valley, knew enough to pick the right valley and the right girl and the right boy to turn against her. Yes, Kyle. Elara. That person isn't a farmer in Hollowvale. No, he said. That person isn't a farmer in Hollowvale. She took her hand off her eyes. Kyle was looking at her with something complicated in his face. Not pity. She would have hated it if it had been pity. It was something harder. A kind of grim respect, the look of a man watching someone do arithmetic he had been hoping they wouldn't do yet. How close is this person to you? She said. Close enough. How close, Kyle? Close enough that I came down to the festival last night without telling him where I was going. And he still found a way to make sure that the girl in the valley was the one girl who wouldn't be there to find. A counselor. One of yours. One of mine. Maybe more than one. Name. Kyle looked at her. I'm not going to give you a name, he said. Not today. Not because I don't trust you. Because if you know a name and the wrong person asks you about it, you die. And I have just gone to a great deal of trouble to pull you off the ground of a vineyard, and I would rather not throw that away for the sake of satisfying your curiosity before breakfast. I'm not curious. I'm angry. I can see that. Somebody in your court spent a year poisoning my life to get in front of you, Kyle. Yes. A year. Yes. I cooked him dinner every Sunday. Her voice broke. She hated that it broke. She made it stop. I held his mother's hand when she was sick in the spring. I sat up with her for 3 nights, and the whole time, Elara? The whole time, he was, Elara. She stopped. She was breathing too fast. She made herself breathe slower. She picked up the knife again, not to use it, just to have something in her hands that had weight. The leather grip was worn smooth by somebody else's palm, in a shape that did not fit hers. She curled her fingers around it anyway. I want the name, she said. No. Kyle. No, Elara. Not today. Ask me for a lot of things and I'll give them to you. Don't ask me for this one. Why? Because if I give you the name, Kyle said very quietly, you are going to do exactly what I would do if I were you, and you're going to get yourself killed trying, and I have not come this far to watch you do that. She stared at him. He stared back. He did not look away. He did not soften. He did not reach for her. He just held her eye, and after a long moment she was the one who looked down, because he was right. And she had known, sitting there with the knife in her hand, that she was 10 seconds from getting on the horse alone and riding it back to the valley, to find a man whose name she didn't have, and put the knife in him, and she would have been dead before the sun was fully up. And Kael Draven had watched the thought move across her face and had said no before she said it out loud. "All right," she said. "All right? All right, not today." "Thank you." She laughed. It was a small, wet laugh. "Did you just thank me?" "I did." "That's the strangest thing anybody's said to me in the last 12 hours, and I've had a morning." "I know, I'm sorry." "Stop saying you're sorry." "All right." He got up off his knee. He moved slowly, like a man whose back hurt, and she realized with a small start that he had, in fact, slept outside, or at least not slept, and that his coat, his other coat, the one he was still wearing, was damp at the shoulders with dew. He put his hand on the stove and looked at the fire. It had gone down to nothing. He crouched and fed it 2 more sticks without looking at what he was doing. "We have to move," he said. "I know. Not in an hour. Now." "I know." "Elara, I mean it. Halloran is going to be back at the festival grounds by noon, and he's going to tell Rowan Kessler that the man in the cabin was me, and Rowan is going to understand at that moment that he's got about 16 hours to live, and he is not going to spend those 16 hours sitting quietly. He's going to send everybody he has at us. He's going to send them at us with horses and dogs and anything else he can put in their hands, because he has just understood that his only chance of surviving this is to get to you before I get a message out. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Then we go now." "Kael, Elara, and Gians, I'm not going with you." He stopped, halfway to the door. He turned very slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Say that again." She stood up. Her legs didn't shake this time. She was surprised by that. She set the knife down on the cot. She pulled his coat, the one from the vineyard, off her shoulders and folded it badly, and held it across her arms like an offering. "I'm not going with you," she said. "Not today, not yet. Elara, you will die here." "I won't die here. I'll die somewhere, probably soon, but I'm not going to die in a cabin in the north because I let you put me on that horse again." "That's what going with me prevents." "No, Kael." She was surprised by how steady her voice was. "That's what going with you makes inevitable. You think I don't understand what you just told me? You think I don't understand what it means that somebody in your court spent a year taking me apart from 1,000 miles away? Kael, if I get on that horse behind you, I am going to arrive at whatever house you live in, and in a month, or a year, or 3 years, somebody there is going to finish what Rowan started. Somebody quieter, somebody closer, and I'll die in a nicer bed, but I'll die. I won't let that. You can't stop it. You can't because you don't know who it is. That's what you just told me." He stood there with his hand on the doorframe. She could see him thinking. She could see him running in his head through the things he could say to her. She could see him discarding most of them. "What do you want to do?" he said finally. "I want to go back." "Back where?" "To the valley." "Elara, listen to me. Listen. Rowan Kessler needs me dead because I'm the story. You said it last night. I'm the story, and the story is what kills him. So he's going to come after the story. He's going to send Halloran and his cousins and anybody else he can buy, and they're going to come at me, and every single one of them is a man I have known since I was a child. I know their farms. I know their wives. I know which ones are in debt, and which ones sleep with who, and which ones beat their horses. I know more about those men than you can learn in a year, Kael, and they have no idea that I know. So I'm not running. I'm going to go back to the valley, and I'm going to stand in the middle of the festival grounds. They always leave the grounds up for a week after the binding. They take the bonfire down last. And I'm going to tell every single one of those people exactly what Rowan Kessler did. In daylight. With every one of those faces looking at me. And this time, they are not going to be allowed to look away. They looked away last night, Elara. Last night they didn't know. Or they told themselves they didn't know. Today they do. There's a difference. No, there isn't. There is. Elara, there isn't. His voice was low, but it was not gentle. I have watched this play out in 8 valleys. I have watched it play out in cities. People don't change their minds about who a woman is because she tells them the truth. They change their minds when there's a cost to not changing. That is the only thing that moves a crowd. A cost. Then I'll give them a cost. What cost? You don't have anything, Elara. I'm sorry, but you don't. You have a father who loves you and a torn dress and a knife you don't know how to use. The words landed harder than he meant them to. She saw him wince, a small movement at the corner of his mouth, as soon as they were out. He didn't take them back. You're right, she said. Elara, you're right. I don't have anything. And if I walk into the grounds alone, I'm a sad girl with a torn dress and a story. And in a week, the valley will have decided I made the whole thing up. And in a month, they'll decide I was mad. And in a year, my own father will wonder. I know that. I'm not stupid. I didn't say you were stupid. You implied it. I did not. You did, Kyle. You did, and you know you did. It's fine. It's also true. He ran a hand down his face. He looked for a moment like any tired man in any kitchen anywhere, arguing with a woman who would not listen to sense. Then what? He said. What are you going to do? I'm going to walk into the grounds, she said, with you. He went still. Not beside you, she said, not touching you, not on your horse. I'm going to walk in, and you are going to walk in 30 paces behind me in the coat you put on my shoulders last night, and you are going to stand at the back of the crowd, and you are going to say nothing. You are going to let every single person in that meadow, one by one, over the course of about 5 minutes, realize who the tall man at the back in the fine black coat is. You are not going to help me. You're going to be the cost. Cale stared at her. Then slowly, he sat down on the wooden chair. He put his elbows on his knees. He laced his fingers together. He did not look at her for a long time. You want me to be a threat, he said. I want you to be a fact. That's different. A threat is a man saying something. A fact is a man who is just there. You're going to be a fact. And when Rowan Kessler sees that fact, he'll break, or he won't. Either way, the valley will see him break or see him try not to, and they will understand. Every one of them will understand, in that meadow without anyone raising a voice, that the man they let hollow me out last night is a man you have come for, and that by standing there and not stepping in, they made themselves part of it. And then, and only then, I tell the story. Elara. Yes, that is either the smartest thing I've heard anybody say in this country in 10 years, or it is going to get you shot in the throat in a meadow full of people who grew up with you. I know. Do you? Yes. He was quiet for a long time. I hate this plan, he said. I know. I have hated a lot of plans in my life. I hate this one more than any of them. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me. All right. He stood up. He walked past her to the shelves she wasn't supposed to touch, and he took down a small cloth-bound bundle from the top one. She had not even noticed it last night, and he untied it. Inside were 3 things: a folded piece of cloth that looked like a shirt, a small brass compass, and a ring. The ring was not ornate. It was a plain, heavy thing, a band of dark silver, worn flat across the top where something had been engraved once and had been worn away by somebody's thumb across a lot of years. It was the kind of ring a man wore every day for a long time before he didn't. Cale looked at it in his hand for a second. Then he closed his fingers around it. Put this on, he said, and held it out to her. What is it? It was my mother's. Elara did not take it. Kyle, it doesn't mean what you think it means. Not today. Today it means one thing only, that if somebody in that meadow today puts a hand on you, there will be more of a cost than just me. It's a sign. Anyone who knows the North will know what it is. And if one man in that meadow knows, everybody in that meadow will know by the end of the afternoon. Whose sign? The Draven line. You're serious. I don't joke about my mother, Elara. I can't wear... You can. You will. Put it on your right hand, not your left. That's important. Right hand. He pressed it into her palm. His hand closed over hers just for a second, and the hum she had felt last night in the vineyard came back, softer this time, a low ache, more like an answer than a question. She put the ring on her right hand. It was too big. Of course it was too big. She moved it to her middle finger and it fit there, loose but not sliding. The dark silver looked absurd against the tan of her hand. She flexed her fingers. It was heavier than she'd expected, the way the knife had been heavier. Ready, he said. No. Good, he said. Let's go. They rode south through the morning. It was slower than the night ride. The horse was tired, and they were not running from dogs now. They were riding toward a meadow with a plan, and Kael made them stop twice. Once at a stream so the horse could drink. Once at the top of a ridge where the whole hollow vale spread out below them in the sun. A long green bowl with a bright thread of river and the pinprick smokes of 20 farmhouses, and, at the far south end, the white stretch of the festival grounds like a healing scar. From up on the ridge, it looked like a place nothing bad had ever happened. Kael sat behind her on the horse with one hand on the reins and one hand resting, light, on her hip where the saddle met her body. Not holding her, just touching, the way a man touches a latch to know it's set. She could feel the warmth of his palm through the torn dress and the coat. "That's it?" he said. "That's it. It's small. It's the whole world." It was the whole world until last night. She could feel him not saying the thing he wanted to say. She was grateful for it. They came down off the ridge and into the lower vineyards and then onto the wagon track, the same track they had come down last night, in the opposite direction, in the dark. In the daylight, the track was crusted with frozen mud and wheel ruts and a long scrape where something heavy had been dragged recently. Elara saw it and chose not to ask. A half-mile from the grounds, Kael stopped the horse. "This is where I let you down," he said. She nodded. He swung off. He helped her down. He was careful, very careful, about where his hands went and for how long, and when her feet hit the ground, he stepped back immediately, as if to prove something to her that she had not asked him to prove. 30 paces, she said. 30 paces. Black coat, no hat. Let them see your face. Yes. Don't say anything. Not a word, Kael. Not if he shouts at me. Not if anybody shouts at me. Elara, not a word. I mean it. I understand. Do you? Yes. She took a breath. The air was cold. The sky above the valley was the pale, washed blue of a morning after a hard night. And somewhere in a far pasture, a cow was complaining about something. A deep, homey sound that had nothing to do with anything that was about to happen. I'm going, she said. Elara. Yes. If it goes wrong, you put the ring out, right hand up, where they can see it. That's all. You don't have to say anything. You just put it up. All right. Promise me. I promise. She started walking. She did not look back. The festival grounds in the morning were a sad kind of place. The bonfire was down to a smoking black mound. The lanterns in the apple trees had been taken down and stacked in wooden crates along the edge of the meadow. The binding stone still stood in its circle, looking, now in daylight, exactly as ordinary as it had always looked, a waist-high chunk of granite in a ring of smaller stones, the kind of thing you could walk past and never notice. The meadow wasn't empty. That was the thing. The meadow wasn't empty because the valley was not done with her yet. It was the morning after a binding, which meant the pack held court. It was a small court. It was a formality, usually. The elders sat around the binding stone in a loose half-circle, and the new bonded couple came before them, and the elders formally welcomed them into the pack, and there was tea, and someone's grandmother brought bread, and the whole thing took 40 minutes. Today, the court was not small. There were maybe 200 people on the grounds, not the 2,000 from last night, the 200 who had not gone home. The elders were in their places. Packmaster Donnell sat in the center with his ceremonial sash over his shoulders, and he was not drinking tea. He was speaking quietly to a man standing beside him, a man Elara did not know. A thin man in a dark traveling coat, with a neat gray beard, with the kind of boots that didn't belong in a valley. A man who had come in last night or this morning from somewhere else. Rowan Kessler was there. He was standing to Donnell's right in his father's green coat, and his face was gray. He had not slept. She could see it from across the meadow, the way he was standing, the way his hands kept going to the same pocket and coming back out empty. He was waiting for Halloran. He did not know yet that Halloran was not coming back the way he'd sent him. Mira Ashford was there. She was standing a little behind Rowan to his left, and she was, Elara noted with a tiny, cold, useful thrill, wearing Elara's mother's pattern, the vines. She had worn her own dress, but she had added a strip of embroidery at the collar, a crude, hasty imitation of the vines, The kind of thing a woman stitches at 3 in the morning when she's trying to be something she isn't. It was not a good copy. Mira's hands had never been as fine as Elara's, and she hadn't had time. Elara walked into the meadow. She did not stop at the edge. She walked straight down the center aisle, through the circle of people, and the meadow saw her. It saw her in stages. A few of the children saw first. They went still because children go still before adults do. Then the women along the edge. Then the elders' wives. Then finally, the men turned, one after another, like cards flipping in a row, and a silence started at the back of the gathering and rolled forward toward the binding stone. And by the time Elara Voss, in her torn dress, with her hair undone, with a strange black coat over her shoulders, and a heavy silver ring on her right hand, walked into the inner circle, the whole grounds had gone quiet. Packmaster Donal stood up. "Elara, Packmaster, we thought, I know what you thought. Your father said, my father doesn't know I'm here. Elara." It was Mira. It was Mira's voice, and Elara had not meant to look at her, had promised herself on the ride down that she would not look at Mira, but her face turned before she could stop it. Mira took a step forward. Her eyes were red. She had been crying again. She was good at crying. Elara had forgotten, over the years, how good Mira was at crying, how easily the tears came, how wet and real they always looked, how they had gotten Mira out of 100 small troubles since they were children. "El," Mira said. "Oh, El, please, we've been, don't. Let me, don't, Mira, not a word, not one." Mira stopped. Rowan stepped in front of her. His green coat was wrinkled. His hair, which had been combed last night, was not combed now. He had the look of a man who had been pacing for 8 hours. "Elara," he said, "where have you been?" She looked at him. She really looked at him. The boy she had kissed under the river bridge. The man she had cooked for. The man who had made a calculation a year ago, sitting in some room somewhere, being spoken to by a quiet man with a gray beard. A man, she realized with a sudden slow dropping of her stomach, who might be the exact man standing at Donal's right hand right now, in those expensive boots. "Nowhere," she said. "Elara, nowhere you need to know about. Your father—" "Leave my father out of your mouth." Rowan flinched. There was a murmur in the crowd. Packmaster Donal held up a hand. "Elara Voss," Donal said. "This is a bonded court. You know the rules. If you have grievance, you bring it before the elders. You do not walk in and, 'I bring grievance.' Then you will wait your—" "I bring grievance against Rowan Kessler." Donal closed his mouth. The meadow breathed in, all at once. "Elara," Donal said carefully, "think about what you are." "I've thought. I bring grievance against Rowan Kessler, son of Bern Kessler, for falsely claiming a mate under false pretenses at the binding stone of the Silverpine Pack last night. I bring grievance against him for conspiracy, and I bring grievance against him for attempted murder." The meadow did not breathe out. Rowan's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "Attempted," Donal said. "Murder, yes. Elara, that is a very serious—" "It is. Charged to bring without—" "I have a witness." "Where?" "There." And Elara Voss, with 200 pairs of eyes on her, raised her hand, the right one, not the left, with the heavy silver ring catching the morning sun, and pointed to the back of the meadow. Cale Draven was standing in the aisle. He had taken the last 30 paces while she was speaking. He was exactly where she had asked him to be, at the back, alone, in the tall black coat with his head bare. His hands were at his sides. He was not doing anything. He was not speaking. He was not, as she had made him promise, reaching for anything. He was simply standing there. It took, honestly, about 10 seconds. The thin man in the expensive boots saw first. He had been standing at Donal's elbow, and he was the only man in the meadow who had come from somewhere that mattered. And he saw the tall man at the back, and his face did something that was not a flinch and was not a smile, and was something in between. A flicker, a single dropped stitch, a microscopic breaking of a composure that had been very carefully built. It was the face of a man who had just seen, walking into a room, the one person he had spent a year making sure would not be there. Elara saw it. She saw it, and she filed it away like a hunter files the shape of a track. Then she looked at Packmaster Donal, and she watched the old man see Kyle, Donald did not drop any stitches. Donald had been packmaster for 31 years, and he had seen more than any man in the valley, and he had been to 2 council gatherings in the capital, and he had sat in a room once, 20 years ago, when a very young Kyle Draven had come in with his father. He knew the face. He had known it the second it walked into his meadow. Donald went very, very pale under his beard. "Oh," he said. It came out as almost a whisper. "Oh, child, what have you done?" "I've brought my witness," Elara said. "Elara, you don't... He isn't..." "I know who he is, Packmaster." And Donnell, old Donnell, who had been kind to her once at her mother's funeral, who had given her a peppermint when she was 9 and scraped her knee, closed his eyes for a long second like a man who has been handed a weight he did not plan on carrying. Rowan had not turned around yet. Rowan was still staring at her. He had not seen Kyle. He had been watching her face the whole time because Rowan Kessler was not, for all his planning, a man who paid attention to the backs of meadows. "Elara," he said, and his voice was small now, nothing like the voice at the binding stone last night. "Elara, what witness?" "Turn around, Rowan." "What?" "Turn around." He turned. His eyes found Kyle. He did not know who Kyle was. That was the terrible, exquisite, cold thing about it. Rowan Kessler had spent a year under the instruction of a man in a dark traveling coat, and he had done every single thing that man had told him to do. And he did not know whose face he was looking at now, because he was not important enough to have been told. He only knew, looking at the man at the back of the meadow, that something had gone wrong. Then he saw the thin man at Donnell's elbow, and he saw the thin man's face, and Rowan Kessler, for the first time in his life, understood. "Counselor," he said. His voice cracked on it. "Counselor Varys." "Be quiet, boy," the thin man said. "But be quiet, Varys." The name went through Elara like a knife. She did not move. She did not react. She had the name now. She had the name, and she had the face, and she had, on her right hand, a heavy silver ring that every man in the valley who had been to the capital could identify. And she had 30 paces behind her, the most dangerous man alive, who had told her that morning that if anyone laid a hand on her, there would be more of a cost than just him. The meadow was so quiet she could hear the crows in the apple trees. "Packmaster Donnell," she said. "Yes, child." "I would like to present my formal charges. Elara, Pack law. You cannot refuse. I have a witness present in good standing. I have evidence. I have a body on the ground up north. Not a dead body, a living one. A man named Joss Halloran, who can be brought here within 2 days and questioned before this court. I invoke I know what you invoke. Then you will hear me." Donnell looked for one long, terrible second at Counselor Varys. Varys gave him nothing. Not a shake, not a nod. His face had gone back to its careful neutral. He was a man who, Elara understood now, made his living by never being the one who chose. Donnell looked at Kyle. Kyle gave him nothing either, just stood there in the black coat, a fact. Donnell looked finally at Elara. "I will hear you," he said. And that was when Rowan Kessler, who had been given very careful instructions by a very careful man for a very careful year, did the one thing nobody in that meadow had told him to do, the one thing that was entirely and terribly his own. He reached under his father's green coat. Elara saw him do it. She saw his hand go in at the breast and come back out, and she saw, in his hand, the short-barreled pistol that no wolf in the valley was supposed to carry, a thing from the trade towns, cheap, ugly, the kind of thing men bought from coach drivers for a week's wages. And she saw his arm come up, and she saw, very clearly, the black circle of the barrel find her chest, and she heard a woman somewhere in the crowd scream, and she felt her own right hand start to come up. The ring. She was supposed to raise the ring. He told her if it went wrong to raise the ring. She didn't get her hand up in time. Rowan Kessler fired. The shot went wide. Later, days later, lying awake in a bed that was not hers, in a room that was not hers, in a house she had not yet decided whether she trusted, Elara would try to reconstruct what had happened in the half-second between Rowan's finger on the trigger and the sound of the shot, and she would not be able to. Her memory had a hole in it the shape of the moment. There was Rowan's arm coming up, and the black circle of the barrel on her chest, and then there was a noise like a board snapping, and then Rowan was on the ground 6 feet away from where he had been standing, and Kyle was between her and him. She had not seen Kyle cross the meadow. Neither, she would learn, had anybody else. 30 paces. He had covered 30 paces in a half circle around her, and the only evidence that he had done it was that the shot that should have gone through Elara Voss's breastbone had gone, instead, into the dirt 8 feet to her left, and Rowan Kessler was on his back in the grass with the pistol 3 feet from his hand and his mouth open and no sound coming out. Kyle had not hit him. That was the strange thing. Elara, who had been looking at Rowan's eyes when the gun went off, had seen Rowan's whole body jerk sideways a half second before the shot, as if something invisible had put a shoulder into him at the exact moment his finger pulled. She had seen it. She had not imagined it. Kyle had not been close enough to touch him. He had only been walking, fast but not running, and Rowan had gone sideways anyway, and the bullet had gone into the ground. It was not a thing a man did. She filed that too in the part of her mind that was very quickly filling up with things she didn't have room for yet. Cale stood between her and Rowan now. He had not drawn anything. His hands were loose at his sides. He was breathing evenly, the way a man breathes after a short walk, not a sprint. He did not look at Rowan on the ground. He was looking at the pistol. "Pick it up," he said. Rowan stared at him. "Rowan, pick up the pistol." Pick it up, boy, or don't. I don't care. But decide." Rowan did not move. Kyle waited. The meadow had started to make sound again. Not speech, not yet. The sound of a crowd remembering to breathe. Somebody was crying. A child. Somebody else was saying "oh" over and over, the same soft, useless word. A woman's voice, probably one of the Kessler aunts. Packmaster Donnell had not moved from where he stood. His hand was on the binding stone. He was holding it the way a man holds a railing in a bad wind. Counselor Varys had moved, though. Elara saw it out of the corner of her eye. Varys had taken one step, just one, toward the path that led out of the meadow, toward the long hill that went up to the trade road, where, she realized with a small cold precision, he would almost certainly have a horse waiting. Not a farm horse. Another one of those other kinds of horses. She did not look at him directly. She kept her face on Rowan. "Varys," she said. She did not raise her voice. He stopped. He did not turn around. "Counselor Varys," Elara said, "if you take one more step toward that path, the man standing behind me is going to follow you up it. And I think you know what happens at the top of that path, if you are the only other person on it." Varys stood very still. "I don't believe we've been introduced, young woman." "No." "Then I fail to see—" "You heard Rowan Kessler say your name 2 minutes ago, Counselor. Every person in this meadow heard him say it. You do not get to pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." The boy was frightened. He named you. He named a man he did not know, a ghost from— He named you by your title, Counselor. Counselor Varys, not a name he invented, a name he has heard, in private, for a year. Varys turned around. He turned slowly, the way a man turns when he is choosing his face carefully on the way. By the time he was facing her, his face had settled into something mild. An old man's face, a wise man's face. The face of a slightly tired counselor who had come a long way to a small valley on the elder's business, and who was, in his way, a little disappointed by the drama. "Young woman," he said, "I understand you've had a hard night. Don't you? You've been— Counselor, don't. Through an ordeal. And ordeals, in my experience, will make a person see shapes in the dark. I have been in this valley less than 12 hours. I arrived last evening to observe the binding, as counselors do in every valley of the Draven territories on behalf of the— You were not at the binding." He paused. "I beg your pardon. You were not at the binding last night, Counselor. I would have seen you. Everyone in this meadow would have seen you. Counselors sit with the packmaster at the binding. You weren't there. You came in sometime between dawn and now." He smiled, thinly. "A small error. I was delayed on the road. I arrived—" "You arrived," Elara said, "because you heard Joss Halloran running his mouth in a tavern on his way back from the north. He rode past the trade road an hour before dawn, and he stopped for a drink at the Brown Hen, and I'd bet every piece of my mother's silver that one of the men in that tavern rode straight to whatever house you were sleeping in, and you got up, and you put on your boots, and you came down to this meadow because you had to be here before I was. You had to be standing next to Donnell, You had to be the man at the packmaster's elbow so that when I walked in and told the truth, you would be the man Donald looked at for a cue. And Donald would have given it to you. Because that is how you do it, counselor. You never tell the packmaster what to do. You just stand close enough that he knows. Varys's face did not change. That, she thought, was the tell. A real man, accused like that, would have done something with his face. Varys did nothing. He had spent too many years in too many rooms, and his face had forgotten how to betray him. That is a very creative story, he said. It's not a story, counselor. It's arithmetic.
Elara Voss.
That is your name, yes? You are standing in a meadow this morning with a man you do not know, in a coat that is not yours, wearing a ring you did not earn, making accusations against a counselor of the crown, on the basis of a drunk man's bar talk and a frightened farm boy's misnaming. I am trying, in the kindest possible way, to tell you that if you walk any further down the road you have chosen to walk down this morning, you will not be able to walk back. I know. Then, I don't want to walk back, counselor. The old man looked at her for a long moment, and in his look, Elara saw, very briefly, a crack under the mildness, something that was not kindness at all, something old and patient and completely unmoved. A look that said, I have taken apart women like you before, in more valleys than you have heard of. I will take you apart too, and by next winter there will not be a single person in Hollowvale who remembers your name. She looked back at him. She let him see her looking. Packmaster Donald, she said, not breaking eye contact with Varys. Would you order the counselor detained, please? Elara, Donald said, and his voice was thin and exhausted. I cannot. You can, Packmaster, on the grounds of pack law. Any man present at a grievance hearing may be held until the hearing concludes. That is the law of the Silver Pine Pack. It has been the law of the Silver Pine Pack since before my grandfather was born. You have the authority. You do not need anyone else's. I cannot detain a counselor of... Yes, you can, Packmaster. The voice came from behind her. It was Kael's voice. He had not spoken in 30 minutes. On pack ground, during a pack hearing, a packmaster's authority supersedes a counselor's. That is also the law. If the counselor has a complaint about it, he can bring that complaint to the crown. The crown will decide. Donald looked at Kael, and Elara watched the old man realize, for the second time that morning, exactly who he was looking at. Yes, Donald said. His voice was almost inaudible. That is also the law. Then detain him. Elara, yes. Donald lifted his hand. Two men stepped out of the crowd. Not Halloran men. The two old pack wardens, Tevin and Brooke, who stood at the edge of every festival and who had been, for 40 years each, the valley's closest thing to a sheriff. They were not fast men. They were not brave men. They were, both of them, men who had been waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, and they moved now with the small, desperate relief of men who had been given an order at last. Counselor, Tevin said, if you'll come with us, please. Varys did not resist. That, in its own way, was terrible. He did not resist at all. He nodded, once, a small, almost polite nod, and he let Tevin and Brooke walk him to the edge of the meadow, and he did not look at Elara again. He did not need to. He had, Elara understood, already decided that this was a small loss in a much longer game, and he was conserving his face for later. It chilled her more than if he had shouted. Elara, Kael said quietly behind her. Don't, she said. Not yet. I'm still standing. All right. She turned back to the binding stone. Rowan was still on the ground. He had not moved since the pistol had fallen. He was looking up at her with an expression she did not, at first, recognize. It took her a moment to place it, and when she did, she felt a small, hard thing crack inside her. It was the expression of a child who had been caught. Not a man. Not a traitor. A child. Rowan Kessler, 25 years old, the man she had been going to marry, was looking at her from the grass of the festival meadow with the face of a little boy who had broken something he wasn't supposed to touch, and who had just realized that no amount of crying was going to put it back together. And the worst part, the part that made Elara's chest feel like a thing with a crack running down the center of it, was that she could still see, In that face, the boy she had kissed under the river bridge. She still loved that boy. A little. In a corner of her that she could not yet kill. She hated him for it. She hated herself for it more. "Get up, Rowan," she said. He did not move. "Get up." Get up." He got up. He got up slowly, the way a man gets up out of deep water. His green coat was wet at the knees where he had knelt in the grass. His hair was full of meadow dirt. He stood in front of her, and his hands hung at his sides, and he did not look at her face. He looked at her throat, like a dog that had been struck. "Rowan Kessler," she said. "Elara, be quiet. I'm not asking you anything yet. I said be quiet." He shut his mouth. She was aware as she stood there of how she looked. Torn dress, hair down her back, a stranger's coat, a ring on her right hand she had not earned, as Varys had said, and he had said it to cut her, and it had cut her because the ring was not hers, and she knew it was not hers, and every person in the meadow could see that it was not hers, and yet, the light of the morning sun on the flat of that ring was, for this 1 hour, worth more than any truth she had ever told. That too, she filed. It would matter later. She was learning this morning a dozen new things about how the world actually worked, and she did not like any of them, and she was going to use all of them anyway. "Rowan Kessler," she said, loud enough for the meadow. "Son of Byrne Kessler, of the Silver Pine Pack, last night, at the binding stone of this pack, in front of 2,000 witnesses, you claim Mira Ashford as your mate. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Louder, Rowan." "Yes." "And 3 minutes ago, before Packmaster Donnell and before this assembled court, you drew a pistol and fired it at me with intent to kill. Is that correct?" "Elara, I didn't—" "Did you fire a pistol at me, Rowan? Yes or no?" He looked at the ground. "Yes." The crowd went through itself like a shiver. "And last night," Elara went on, "you sent 3 men into the north of this valley to a hunter's cabin on the far side of the Ridge Road, with instructions to find me. Is that correct?" "Elara, yes or no, Rowan?" Yes." "And you gave those men 2 sets of instructions. One if I came quietly, another if I did not. Is that correct?" He did not answer. "Rowan." Still, he did not answer. "One of those men," Elara said, "is alive. He is, at this moment, riding back to this valley under an escort. He will arrive by nightfall. He will, before this court, repeat exactly what you told him last night before he rode up the ridge. Would you like to answer the question before he arrives and answers it for you, Rowan, or would you like the pack to hear it from him?" She had made Halloran up. Halloran was probably halfway to the coast. Nobody was riding him back under escort. But Rowan didn't know that. Rowan had spent the last hour in a kind of waking dream, and he was not, she suspected, doing math very well this morning. Rowan's mouth moved. "I told them." His voice was a whisper. "I told them if she wouldn't come back quiet, louder, Rowan, for the pack. I told them if she wouldn't come quiet, to make sure she didn't come back." The meadow made a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was a low, collective animal sound. The sound of 200 people who had spent the night telling themselves a particular story about who was and was not at fault in this matter, realizing, all at once, that the story would not hold, that the story had never held, that they had helped hold it up last night with their looking away. Elara did not look at them. She looked at Rowan. "Why?" she said. "Elara, why, Rowan? Not the planning, not the year of it. I know about the year. I know who told you to do it. I want to know why you did it. Because nobody made you do this, Rowan. Varys told you to take Mira. Varys did not tell you to send men with guns up the Ridge Road. That was you. That part of it was you. Why?" He was crying now, silent crying. The tears were coming down his face, and he was not bothering to wipe them. "Because if you came back," he whispered, "if you came back into the valley and you said what happened, they would what, Rowan? They would know about the counselor, about the money, about what I did." "What money, Rowan?" "Don't." "What money?" "Elara, don't." "What money, Rowan Kessler?" "He paid me!" Rowan Kessler shouted. His voice cracked on it. It was the loudest he had been all morning, and it broke. He paid me, Elara, all right? The counselor. He paid my family. My father was... The mill was going under. You knew that. You knew the mill was going under. I told you. And Varys came to the valley a year ago, and he told my father, that if I bound Mira instead of you at the harvest binding, the crown would buy our grain for 3 years at twice market. And the mill would... He stopped. He was crying too hard to finish. He put his hands over his face. The meadow did not move. Elara stood very still. She had known, walking into the meadow this morning, that she was going to hear something she did not want to hear. She had thought she was ready for it. She had not been ready for this one, because this one was small. This one was the pettiest thing she could imagine. 3 years of grain, a mill, a bad harvest 2 years running, and a family farm 3 bad seasons from losing the wheel, and a man in a traveling coat showing up one evening with a deal in his pocket, and Rowan Kessler, who had kissed her under a river bridge, who had brought his mother's hand to her face when his mother was dying and said, "She's always loved you, Elle. She wants you to know she's always loved you," had sat across a table from that man, and he had said yes, for a mill. For a mill. Elara felt for a very brief moment as if she were going to throw up. She did not throw up. "Mira," she said. Mira had not moved in 10 minutes. She was standing where she had been standing when Elara walked in, behind Rowan, to his left, her hands clasped in front of her in the crude vines she had stitched at 3 in the morning. Her face was gray. "Elle, did you know?" "Elle, please. Did you know, Mira, about the counselor, about the deal?" Mira's mouth opened, Mira's mouth closed. "A little," she whispered. "A little. I didn't know everything. I didn't know about the men, about last night, about what he was going to... I swear to you, Elle, I swear I would never... But you knew he had been paid. Mira, you knew your mate had been paid to take you instead of me." "Yes." The word came out very small. "When did you know?" "Spring." "Spring? When?" "April, early April. The week you came to my house and we fitted my mother's dress." Mira made a small sound. "The week," Elara said, "that you sat in my bedroom and you held up the vines to my shoulder and you told me my mother would have been proud. That week." Don't call me that, Mira. I know, I'm sorry, I know. Elara, please, He told me it would be fine. He told me he loved me. He told me he had loved me for a long time and that the money was just a reason he could tell his family. He told me it was just a cover story, that he was going to do it anyway, that he... She stopped. She had heard herself. Elara watched her hear herself. Watched the words that he was going to do it anyway leave Mira Ashford's mouth and hit the air between them and hang there like a small dead bird. "Oh," Mira whispered. "Oh, yeah," Elara said. "Yeah, that." Mira put her hand to her mouth. For the first time that morning, Elara saw something on Mira Ashford's face that was not calculation. Something real. The specific horror of a woman who, on the strength of a lie she had wanted very much to believe, had helped ruin another woman's life, and who had just realized, in public, at a binding court, in the morning sun, that the lie had been a lie, and that she had known it was a lie the whole time, and that the knowing was worse than the not knowing would have been. Elara watched her realize it. She did not help her. "Packmaster," Elara said, turning away from Mira as if Mira were already the shape of a person who no longer existed. "I have concluded my grievance." "Elara, I have concluded my grievance," she said again. "Under pack law, I ask this court to rule on the 3 charges I have brought, and to rule on them now, before the counselor is escorted off pack ground, and before the man I have named as witness arrives to testify against Rowan Kessler. The charges are a false claim at the Binding Stone, conspiracy between Rowan Kessler and Counselor Varys of the Crown, an attempted murder of me in this meadow 5 minutes ago, in front of every person here." Donald looked at her for a long time. He looked old. He had always looked old, but he looked this morning like a different kind of old, like a man who had thought he had one more easy year left in him and had just been told at breakfast that he would not. "Elara Voss," he said. "Yes, Packmaster, you understand that if I rule on these charges today, there will be consequences. For this pack, for this valley. The Crown will send inquiries. The other Packmasters will send representatives. This will not be a quiet ruling. Yes, Packmaster. And you understand that if I do not rule on these charges today, if I, as Packmaster, ask this court to reconvene in a week, which is within my authority, there is a chance, not a small one, that by next week this matter will have been arranged, quietly, in the way these things get arranged. Yes, Packmaster. And you are asking me, knowing both of those things, to rule. I am, Packmaster. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at Kael Draven, who had come up quietly at some point in the last few minutes, and was now standing 3 paces behind her and to her right, not touching her, not reaching for her, not speaking, just there. And Donnell's old eyes asked a question of the tall man without a word. Kael answered it with a small, almost imperceptible nod. Donnell closed his eyes. Very well, Elara Voss of the Silverpine Pack, he said. His voice had gone formal. It had gone into the cadence of the old law, the one he used maybe twice a year, for burials and for the worst kind of ruling. I will hear your grievance, and I will rule on it, under pack law, before this assembly. He straightened. He had been leaning on the binding stone. He took his hand off it now, and he stood to his full height. Not much, he was a small man, and he lifted his voice, the way a packmaster lifts his voice when he is about to make something true. On the first charge of false claim at the binding stone, by the confession of Rowan Kessler, made here in this court, in the presence of this assembly, I rule the claim of last night null. It is struck from the pack record. Mira Ashford is returned to her father's house. Rowan Kessler is barred from the binding stone of this pack for... He paused. He looked at Elara. For life, Elara said. Elara Boschitz. For life, Donnell said. On the second charge of conspiracy, the testimony of Rowan Kessler, naming Councillor Varys of the Crown, is entered into the pack record. The matter is escalated to the Crown. Councillor Varys will be held on pack ground until such escalation receives response. On the third charge, of attempted murder. By the sight of every witness here, this charge is proven. Rowan Kessler is hereby... Another pause. Remanded to pack custody, to be held until a Crown court may hear the charge. His lands, his family's lands, and the lands of the mill on the East Road are seized by the pack under emergency statute, pending the outcome of that hearing. Rowan made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a small piece of his life coming apart in a specific way. Donnell did not look at him. Elara Voss, Donnell said. Yes, Packmaster. You are acknowledged. Say that again, please, Packmaster. You are acknowledged, child. You were wronged. You were wronged in this pack and by this pack and before this pack. I acknowledge it. I acknowledge it before this assembly. And on behalf of the elders of the Silverpine Pack, He stopped. He had to stop. He put his hand over his mouth for a second, and when he took it away, his eyes were wet in a way that surprised her. He had not cried for her last night. He had stood in that meadow with all the others. Now this morning, looking at her, something had broken in the old man's face. I apologize, Packmaster Donnell said. To you, by name, Elara Voss. On behalf of a pack that failed you last night, we let you walk out of this meadow alone. Every one of us did. I include myself. I am sorry, child. I am so sorry, child. He bowed his head. He bowed his head to her. The packmaster of the Silverpine Pack, in a white sash with 31 years of service stitched into its hem, in front of 200 of his own people, bowed his head to a 24-year-old woman in a torn dress. The meadow made another sound. This one was different. It was the sound of 200 people, not all at once, but one at a time, deciding which side of a line to stand on. Elara heard it happen. She heard feet shuffle. She heard coats move. She saw, out of the corner of her eye, old Miss Thorne from the post, who had not met her eye at the binding stone last night, step forward out of the crowd and put her hand on Elara's sleeve, very briefly, and say, too quietly for anyone but Elara to hear, "I'm sorry, duckling. I'm so sorry," and step back. She saw the Kellum brothers do the same thing. She saw her father, Hale Voss was at the edge of the crowd. He had come down from the farm on foot. She could see that. His boots were wet, his coat was buttoned wrong, and his gray hair was blown back as if he had run the whole last mile. He was standing with his hat crushed in his hands, the way he had been standing last night. And when her eyes found his face did the thing it had done last night, the whole face caving in from the inside. And this time, unlike last night, she did not keep walking. She went to him. She crossed the meadow, through the parting crowd, through people who would not touch her, and people who put their hands out and touched her anyway as she passed. Old women, mostly. Old women she had known her whole life who suddenly remembered they had known her whole life. And she walked up to her father, and she put her arms around him, and Hale Voss, who had not cried in her presence since the winter her mother died, put his face into his daughter's shoulder and made a sound that was not fit for a meadow. "I should have come after you," he said into her shoulder. "Last night, I should have. You did come after me, Dad." "I didn't, Elle. I didn't. I sat up all night in the kitchen. You came after me this morning. That's enough. That's plenty." "It isn't. It's what we've got, Dad." He held her at arm's length. His hands were shaking. His face was a wreck. "Is it true?" he said. "What he did? The counselor? The mill? It's true." "Elle, don't, Dad, not now. Later, when we're home." He nodded. He nodded without being able to speak. He pulled her in again and held her for a long moment. And she smelled sawdust and pipe smoke and the particular wool of her father's old coat. And for the first time since Rowan Kessler had opened his mouth at the binding stone last night, Elara Voss, in her mother's torn dress, put her forehead against her father's shoulder and allowed herself to come apart for exactly 5 seconds. No more. She counted them. Then she straightened up and she wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and she turned around to face the meadow again, because she was not done. Kael was still where he had been standing. He had not moved during her walk to her father. He had not taken a step in any direction. He was giving her, as he had given her last night in the vineyard, the courtesy of not watching her face while she was breaking. He was looking, instead, at the binding stone, at the packmasters, at Donald. Elara walked back across the meadow to him. She did not take his hand. She stopped in front of him, and she looked up into his face, and she said, very quietly, "Thank you. Don't thank me. I am thanking you. Elara, you kept your promise. You didn't say a word. You let me do it. You did it. We did it." He almost smiled. His mouth did the thing that was not a smile but was a cousin to one. "Your ring," he said. "What about it? Put your hand up." "What?" "Put your hand up, Elara, where the meadow can see it." She did not understand. She put her hand up anyway. She raised her right hand above her shoulder, the way a witness raises a hand in an old court, and the flat of the dark silver ring caught the morning sun, and Kael Draven stepped up beside her and he lifted his own right hand, bare, no ring on it, just the long clean hand of a man, and he laid his palm flat against the back of her hand very briefly, with the ring between their palms like a small warm stone, and the meadow saw it. And the meadow understood. It was not a claim. She knew that. He had told her back in the cabin that the ring did not mean what she thought it meant, and she had not known then what she had thought it meant, but she understood now. She understood, with his palm warm on the back of hers, in front of 200 of her own people, in her mother's torn dress, that what he had done was not a claim but an introduction. "This is Elara Voss of the Silver Pine Pack. I am Kael Draven. She is known to me. She is known to my house. She walks under my line sign not because she has accepted anything, but because she has been seen. And anyone who moves against her will answer to me." It was, as messages went, the clearest one any man had ever sent in the Hollowvale Valley. He took his hand away after a second. He stepped back. He did not touch her again. The meadow stayed quiet. Somebody, she did not see who, started to clap. It was one slow pair of hands at first from somewhere near the back of the crowd, and it was awful, honestly. It was the worst kind of applause. Halting, embarrassed, the applause of a pack that did not know what else to do with what had just happened and had decided, collectively, stupidly, humanly, that it had to do something. Another pair of hands joined, then another. It did not become a roar. It never became a roar. It stayed small and uneven and ugly, and it rolled across the meadow for maybe 30 seconds, and then it stopped, and nobody knew how to end it. And there was a long, embarrassed silence, and somewhere in the embarrassed silence, a child laughed. A small, clean, uncomplicated laugh. A child laughing at a dog or at a crow or at nothing. And the laugh cut through the silence and broke it, and the pack, slowly, started to breathe again. Elara put her hand down. She looked at Kyle. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing, in that moment, that could have been said out loud in a meadow full of 200 people that would not have been smaller than what had actually happened. But she saw him see her. And for the first time in her life, she felt, with a quiet, sharp, unshowable certainty that she would carry for the rest of her days, what it was to be looked at by another person and not have to wonder whether they were seeing her or some useful version of her. Cale Draven was, this morning, seeing her. And Elara Voss, in her mother's torn dress, for the first time in 24 years, did not look away. Winter came to Hollowvale the way winter always came. Not in a single storm, but in a slow, patient argument with the valley. A week of cold mornings and iron skies and the river going quiet under a skin of ice. And then, one Tuesday in the middle of November, 3 full days of snow that buried the fences to the top rail and made the whole valley look, from the ridge road, like a clean piece of paper somebody had torn out of a book and laid flat. By the time the snow stopped, a lot of things had changed. The pack did not, at first, know how to be around Elara Voss. That was the honest part of it, and the part nobody in the valley would say out loud. She had been, until the morning after the binding, a specific kind of person in their minds. The quiet Voss girl, Hale's daughter, the one with the mother's eyes, the one who was going to marry the Kessler boy. She had fit in a small slot in the valley's head. Now she did not fit. Now she walked down to the market with her father on a Saturday morning, and the market went a little quieter when she came through the gate, and people smiled at her, and they smiled too hard, and they greeted her with her name and with Miss Voss, and sometimes, the worst ones, with a small, confused little bow of the head, and she hated every single one of those interactions, and she did not show it, because she had spent a lifetime not showing things. And this one small skill was turning out to be, of all things, the thing that served her best. Cale did not stay in the valley. That had surprised her at first. She had thought, stupidly, she told herself later, that after the meadow he would stay, that they would sit in her father's kitchen and have something to drink, that there would be some kind of conversation about what they were to each other now, since the meadow, since the ring, since his hand on hers. There had not been that conversation. Kyle had walked her back to her father's cart and had helped her up into it. He had said quietly to Hale Voss, "I'll send word, sir." And Hale Voss, who did not know how to talk to a man like Cale Draven, and knew he did not know, had said, "All right." And Kyle had stepped back from the cart, and he had nodded at her, just nodded, the small bare nod of a man who does not trust himself with more than that in front of other people. And then he had turned and walked back into the meadow, where the wardens were still holding Counselor Varys, and where a rider was already being sent north toward the capital with sealed papers. She had watched him go over her shoulder until the cart rounded the bend and she couldn't see him anymore. She did not cry. She had done enough crying. The first letter came 4 days later. It was not a love letter. Elara would have been embarrassed by a love letter. It was a page of careful square handwriting, in black ink, on heavy paper, and it said without preamble, Elara. The counselor was taken north under escort on Sunday night. He will be tried by the Crown Court in the capital on the 31st of this month. You will be required to give testimony. I will send a carriage for you and your father 2 days before. Bring warm clothing. The capital is colder than the valley, and the rooms are drafty. I have seen to lodging. You will not be required to stay in a crown house. Rowan Kessler was remanded to pack custody as Packmaster Donald directed. His family was given 30 days to vacate the mill. I have also arranged, at your discretion, which I will not ask about in writing, for the mill to be purchased at fair price by a man I trust, who does not know your name. If you would prefer that I do not arrange this, write back, and I will not. If you would prefer to buy the mill yourself, write back and I will arrange the loan at no interest. I have no opinion on what you should do. I will do what you ask. 3 men came into this valley last week looking for a woman of your description. They did not find her. They will not come back. This is all I will say about it in a letter. Your ring is yours. Please do not mail it back to me. I would find it very annoying. K. She had laughed at the last line, in her father's kitchen, with her fingers on the paper, and her father had looked up from his tea and said, "What?" "Nothing," she said. He's funny. A little. Not on purpose." "Is he?" "Yes." Her father had not said anything else about Cale Draven for a long time after that. Hale Voss was, in his way, a man with a very fine sense of the size of a thing, and he had understood from the instant his daughter had gotten out of that cart 4 days earlier with a dark silver ring on her right hand and a man half a mile back in the meadow watching her go, that whatever was between his daughter and Cale Draven was not something he was going to be able to push on in any useful direction. He had decided, the way he decided everything, with a long look at the kitchen ceiling and one careful nod, that he was going to let his daughter tell him about it in her own time. She did tell him a little over the next weeks. Not everything. Some of it she did not have the language for yet, but she told him enough. About the cabin, about the cousin with the cut arm, about the ring, that by the time the snow came and buried the fences, Hale Voss had a good working idea of what his daughter had lived through in the 2 days she had been away from him, and he did not sleep well for a while after that, and he did not tell her that either. They went up to the capital on the 29th. The carriage Kyle had sent was not ostentatious, which surprised her. It was a plain dark coach with 2 horses driven by a quiet man named Corwin, who tipped his hat at her and loaded their bags without being asked, and did not ask a single question the whole 3-day ride. The lodgings were not ostentatious either. They were, in fact, a small set of rooms above a butcher's shop on a side street in the merchant quarter, clean and warm and plain, with a stove that drew well, and a window that looked out over a courtyard where a gray cat sat on a barrel all day watching pigeons. Elara had expected something grand. She had been, she realized walking up those stairs behind the butcher's boy, a little bit prepared to resent something grand. The butcher's boy put their bags down and said, "The gentleman said to tell you, ma'am, if you don't like it, there are 2 other places, and you can pick whichever." "This is fine," Elara said. "He said you'd say that," the boy said. "He said to tell you he picked this one on purpose." She laughed. She could not help it. She tipped the boy a coin, and he grinned at her and went whistling back down the stairs, and Hale Voss sat down on the edge of the narrow bed in the second room and said, "That man pays attention, El." "Yes, Dad." "That's a useful quality in a man." "Yes, Dad." "Useful," Hale Voss said again, and looked at his own boots, and did not look up, and did not say anything else for a while. The trial was not what she had expected. It took 2 days. There was a long stone room with a low ceiling and a long oak bench behind which sat 9 crown magistrates, each in a dark robe, each with a short white collar, and there was a bench for testimony, and there was Counselor Varys in plain gray clothes. They had taken his coat, with his hands folded in his lap, and he looked, over those 2 days, at exactly nothing. He did not look at her when she walked into the room. He did not look at her when she took the oath. He did not look at her when she described, in careful, flat, unadorned sentences, the things he had done. He looked at the middle distance, and his face did the mild thing again, and when they asked him at the end of the 2nd day whether he had anything to say in his own defense, he said, "No, honored magistrates, I do not." That was all. They sentenced him that afternoon. Elara did not stay for it. Kyle had asked her, quietly, the night before, if she wanted to be in the room when they read the sentence, and she had said no, and he had said, "All right," and that was the end of it. She heard about it later. It was a long sentence. Varys would not, as Kyle had said on the long ride to the capital, be back in any valley. The night after the sentencing, Kyle came to the rooms above the butcher. He had not been at the trial. She understood without his explaining it that he had not been there on purpose, that his presence would have turned her testimony into something else, made the whole proceeding into a story about him and not about her, and he had decided, somewhere without asking her, that the trial of the Counselor Varys was going to be her trial and not his. It was, she thought, sitting across from him in the small front room, the kind of decision a person made about another person that you could not ask them to explain out loud without breaking it. Her father had gone to bed early. He had shaken Kyle's hand in the doorway, a long, solid handshake, the kind of handshake Hale Voss gave a man once, and then he had said good night, and gone into the second room and closed the door. And Elara was alone with Kyle in the front room for the first time since the meadow, with the stove making small sounds and the cat on the barrel still visible through the window under the street lamp. He had brought wine. He had also brought, in a cloth bag, half a loaf of bread and a small wedge of white cheese and 3 apples, and he laid them out on the table as if he had done this in other people's small rented rooms before, which she was sure, looking at his hands, he had. "I don't know what you drink," he said. "I drink wine." "Good." "I don't drink much of it." "Good, neither do I." They sat down across from each other at a table too small for two. The candle between them was short. Elara had, in the 3 days of the trial, not once cried. She had, in her testimony, not once let her voice do anything but what she wanted it to do. Now, across a small table from this man, with his hand on the neck of a wine bottle and his sleeves rolled back to the forearm, she felt the whole thing wanting to come up out of her chest at once. She did not let it. "How are you?" he said. Don't what?" "Don't ask me that, Kael. Not like that. Not yet. I'll say something I'll regret and I'll hate both of us for a week." He considered her. "All right," he said. "I won't ask you how you are. I'll ask you something else. Did you eat today?" "No." "Eat this." He pushed bread and cheese across the table at her. She took it. She ate a piece of bread, and she ate a piece of cheese, and she was surprised by how hungry she was. She had not noticed. She had not eaten breakfast. She had not eaten lunch. She had testified that morning for 2.5 hours, and afterward she had sat on a bench in a hallway and stared at a crack in the stone floor, and her father had put his hand on her shoulder, and she had forgotten that food was a thing. Kael watched her eat. He did not eat himself. After a minute, he poured wine into 2 cups. They were not wine cups. They were the tin cups the rooms came with, and he pushed one across the table to her. "Kael," she said. I'm tired." "I know. I'm tired in a way I didn't know a person could be tired." "I know. I don't know what I am anymore." He did not answer at first. He drank a little of his wine. He looked at his cup and not at her. "You don't have to know yet," he said. "That's one of the things I wanted to tell you tonight. You don't have to know yet. You can be, for a little while, just a woman who ate a trial for the last 2 days. That's enough. That's plenty. Tomorrow you can start figuring out the next thing." "Is that what you do?" "It's what I did," he said. She looked at him. "When?" 8 years ago." "When what happened?" He did not answer for a long moment. He turned the cup in his hand. The silver at his throat, a chain, she realized, she had not noticed until now, caught the candle. "I went home to the house I grew up in one summer," he said. "I was 23. My father had died a year before. I had spent the year doing the thing I do, taking territory, putting together what he had started, and I had not been home in that year. I came home that summer and I found out that the man who had been my father's chief counselor for 20 years, who had put his hand on my shoulder at my father's funeral and told me I would be a great alpha, had, in that year I was away, arranged for my younger sister to marry a man I did not know. A merchant, he said. A good match, he said. The sister was 16. She did not want to go. She did not know how to tell me she did not want to go. The counselor had convinced her it was what I wanted." Elara did not move. "I rode out to the merchant's house the day I found out," Kael said. "I rode out in the middle of the night. I brought her home. The counselor, when I got back, was gone. He had ridden the other direction the minute he heard I was in the valley. I found him a year later in a port city on the southern coast, and I dealt with it. My sister never married that man. She married a farmer 6 years later, a kind one, and she has 3 children now. She does not speak about that year. I do not bring it up." "Kael, I tell you," he said, "because after I brought her home, that first night, she sat in a kitchen not unlike this one, and she said to me, 'I don't know who I am anymore, Kael. I thought I knew, and I don't.' And I told her, 'You don't have to know tonight.' And she did not know for a long time. She is 41 now. She says she still doesn't some days. I think that is probably true of everyone, but I tell her anyway." Elara was crying. She had not meant to cry. She had made it through the whole trial without crying, through her testimony, through the reading of the charges, through the moment when they had walked Counselor Varys out of the room past her, and he had, for the first time in 2 days, looked at her. A flat, mild, unfinished look, The look of a man who was already thinking about the next valley, the next girl, the next arrangement. And she had not cried then. She had held his look. She had held it until he turned his head away first, which he had, and she had been proud of herself for not crying. Now she was crying, in a rented room over a butcher's shop, about a woman she had never met and a year that had happened 8 years ago to somebody else's sister, and she could not stop, and she did not try to stop, and Kael did not reach across the table. He sat across from her and he let her cry. He did not touch her. He did not say, "It's all right." He did not say anything. He just stayed. When she could speak again, she said, "Thank you for not saying it's all right." "It isn't all right. No. I don't lie about that kind of thing." "I know." He waited. "Kael, I am not going to marry you." He did not even blink. "All right." "I mean it. Not this year. Maybe not ever. I don't know. I can't decide that now. I can't decide anything that big now. I can barely decide what I'm going to have for breakfast tomorrow. I don't want you to spend the next 2 years waiting for a decision, and I don't want myself to spend the next 2 years feeling like I owe one." "Elara, I wasn't going to ask you." "Oh, I was going to ask you something else." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "What?" He looked at her across the small table. His face, in the candlelight, had the same tiredness she had seen in the cabin. He was, she realized, for the first time since the meadow, actually letting her see how tired he was. He had been up, she thought, for most of the last 6 weeks. He had crossed the country twice. He had, between the counselor's arrest and this trial, put down a small uprising in the south that she had heard about from Corwin on the coach ride north. He had not, she suspected, slept more than 4 hours in a row since he had put his coat on her shoulders in the vineyard. "I was going to ask you," he said, "whether you would let me come to Hollowvale when the spring breaks and stay for a week in my father's house. If you would have me, yes. Kael, not to propose, not to anything, to be in a kitchen with you, to split wood with your father, to see the valley in a season that is not this one. Because I would like to know you, Elara Voss, and I would like you to know me. And I think the best way to do that is not in a capital and not in a meadow. I think it is in a kitchen." She looked at him for a long time. "That's a very long way to come," she said, "for a kitchen. I have the time." "Do you?" "I am going to make the time." She laughed. It was a small, wet, half-broken laugh. "All right," she said. "All right? All right, Kael, come in the spring. When the mud breaks, split wood with my father. Eat his bread. You won't like his bread. He is a bad baker. Both of us are bad bakers. We are a bad baker family. I'll bring bread." "Don't." "I'll bring good bread." "He'll be insulted." "I'll bring it anyway." "Fine." They sat across from each other in the small rented room. The candle was almost down. The cat was still on the barrel outside, impossibly patient. Somewhere in the courtyard, someone was playing a fiddle, very quietly, very badly, the tune wandering. Elara listened to it for a minute. "I have a question," she said. "Ask. That thing. In the cabin. When you told me your name and you—" She hesitated. She did not know how to phrase it. "When my hand was in yours, in the vineyard, that thing, the hum, you felt it too." "Yes." "What was it?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No." "The seers didn't tell you." "The seers don't tell you that kind of thing. They tell you where to be. They don't tell you what will happen when you're there." "Kael, that's not an answer." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I think, and I am guessing, Elara, I think it was a thing your body knew before the rest of you did. I think it was your body, in a very bad night, finally letting you know that not every man was going to be the man who made it a very bad night. I don't know if it was anything older than that. I don't know if it was anything from the old stories. I don't care, honestly. I don't need it to be anything from the old stories. I know a lot of people who needed the old stories to make their lives mean something, and most of those people are tired, and a few of them are dead." "That's a bleak answer." "Yes." "I think I like it." "Good." She reached across the small table. She did not take his hand. She put her hand flat on the wood next to his, palm down, close enough that the sides of their fingers were almost touching. She watched the candle in the gap between their hands. She did not move her hand. He did not move his. After a minute, her little finger touched his. That was all, just the side of her little finger against the side of his. He did not move. They sat like that for a long time. The candle went out at some point. Neither of them lit another one. Outside, the fiddle stopped and then started again. A different tune, this one less wandering. Hale Voss snored softly in the next room. The cat came down off the barrel and walked away across the courtyard. "I should go," Kael said eventually. "Yes." Neither of them moved. Kael. The house in the Thornfell. The one your father built. The one you said you'd come from, last month in the letter. That one. Yes. What's it like? It's big. It's too big. I grew up there and I always thought it was too big. There are rooms I haven't been in since I was 12. The kitchen's good though. The kitchen faces east. You can watch the whole sky come up from the kitchen. Good. Why are you asking? I'm not asking anything yet. I'm thinking about it. You said I didn't have to decide anything tonight. That's true. So I'm not deciding anything. All right. I'm just asking about the kitchen. All right, Elara. She smiled at him. He smiled back. It was, she thought, the first full smile she had ever seen on his face. A real one, small and tired and completely his own. The smile of a man who was for exactly 1 second not carrying anything. He got up. He put his coat on. He stood in the doorway with his hand on the latch for a second, and he did not look at her. He was giving her, as he had given her in the vineyard that first night, the courtesy of not looking at her face while she got her face in order. And he said, "Spring." "Spring," she said. He went. She heard his boots on the stairs down to the street. She heard the door below open and close. She heard, after a minute, a horse, one horse, not a coach, move off down the cobbles. She sat at the small table in the dark for another long minute, and then she got up and she went to the window and she watched her own reflection in the dark glass with the courtyard behind her, and she looked at the woman in the glass for a long time. She was not the woman who had walked into the meadow at the Binding Stone 6 weeks ago. She was not quite anybody yet, actually. She was somewhere in between. There were new things in her face. The mouth was harder at the corners. The eyes were steadier. There was a small, patient exhaustion around the eyes that she knew, with a dull, surprised recognition, was going to be there for the rest of her life. You don't spend a night on your knees in a vineyard and walk away looking like a girl ever again. That was all right. She had not particularly wanted to keep looking like a girl. She took the ring off her right hand. She held it in her palm for a second. It was warm from her skin. She turned it so the worn, smooth top of it caught the light from the courtyard lamp, and she thought about Kael's mother, whom she had never met and would probably never meet, and about a hand that had worn this ring every day for a long time and then had not, and about how the smallest objects in the world were the ones that had the most weight in them if you were the one holding them. She put the ring back on her right hand, not the left. The right, as he had told her, months ago now, in the cabin. She went to bed. She did not go back to Rowan Kessler's trial. That was held in the spring, after the mud broke, and she was, not coincidentally, in her father's kitchen that week, splitting wood in the yard with a tall man in his shirt sleeves who had come down from the north with, against her protests, an enormous loaf of extremely good bread. Rowan Kessler was convicted. He served 4 years in a Crown workhouse. He came out at 29. He did not come back to Hollowvale. He went, last anyone heard, to a trade town on the eastern coast, and he worked at a shipyard, and he married a woman who did not know his story. Maybe he told her. Maybe he didn't. Elara did not find out because she did not ask. She did not hate Rowan Kessler anymore by the time she stopped thinking about him. She did not forgive him either. She had simply, one morning, noticed that she had gone several days without thinking his name, and she had decided to keep it that way, and mostly she had. Mira Ashford left the valley before the snow melted. It was Elara's father who told her. Hale Voss had been down at the mill. The new mill, under new ownership, the Kessler family's name scraped off the front board and a new board put up. And he had heard it from one of the men there. Mira Ashford had packed a single bag. Her father had given her some money, and she had taken the morning coach south. No one knew where. She had not said goodbye to anyone. She had not written to Elara. She had not, as far as Elara could tell, ever written to Elara in the years that followed, and Elara did not write to her either, and this too was, in its way, a kind of answer. Elara thought about Mira sometimes, though. Not often, but sometimes. In a very quiet corner of her head, in a late hour, with the stove in her father's kitchen ticking as it cooled, she would think about a small, freckled, red-haired girl of 9 years old sitting on the stoop of Mira's father's farmhouse, and the two of them laughing over something nobody else would have understood. And she would think, without bitterness, only with a kind of clean, grown-up grief, that the girl on that stoop had been real, that the friendship had been real, at least for a while, at least for the first 10 or 12 years of it, that whatever had broken in Mira Ashford, whatever had made her, at some point in her 20s, decide that she wanted what Elara had enough to take it, that was not the whole of her. There had been a girl before that, and Elara had loved that girl. And when she thought about Mira at the edge of sleep, she was thinking about the girl and not the woman, and she decided she was allowed to. People do break, she thought. Not everyone who breaks is evil. Some of them are just tired. Some of them are just scared. Some of them are just small, in ways they did not choose to be small, and they meet a patient man in a traveling coat at the wrong moment of their lives. It did not make it all right, but it did make it true. And Elara Voss, who had started the winter as a woman, who thought the world was one kind of thing, and had finished it as a woman who understood the world was something else, was not, in her heart of hearts, the kind of person who could afford, any more, to pretend that the people who had hurt her had been something simpler than they actually were. She was the kind of person who had to see them clearly, because only if you saw them clearly could you walk away from them cleanly. And she did walk away. Spring came. Kael came with it. He stayed a week. He split wood badly, which her father found endearing. He brought good bread, which her father pretended not to notice, and then ate 3 slices of at breakfast on the second day, which Elara and Kael both noticed, and which none of the 3 of them mentioned. He went home at the end of the week. He came back in the summer. He stayed 2 weeks. He went home. He came back in the fall. A year passed like that. Then another. She did not marry him the first year. She did not marry him the second. In the 3rd year, on a morning in May, in her father's kitchen, with the windows open and a thrush in the yard making an absolute fool of itself, she said, over tea, without planning to say it, "I think I want to see the kitchen in the Thornfell." And Kyle Draven, who had been, for 3 years, very carefully and very deliberately not asking, set his tea down on the table and said, "All right." "Not forever," she said. "All right. I mean it, Kyle." "All right, Elara. I mean, I'm not saying anything about forever yet." "I know. I want to see if I can breathe in a house that big." "I understand. And if I can't breathe in it, I'm coming home." "Yes. And you don't get to sulk about it." "Elara." "What?" "If you can't breathe there, I will bring you home myself." She looked at him over the tea. "All right," she said. He reached across the table very slowly, and he put his hand over hers, not grabbing, not claiming, just his palm over the back of her hand, the way a man covers a candle to keep it from going out in a draft. She turned her hand over, under his, and she laced her fingers through his. It was not a thunderclap. It was not the hum she had felt in the vineyard. It was a much smaller, much more ordinary thing. The fingers of a tired woman and a tired man on a spring morning in a kitchen that was not big enough for either of their lives anymore, holding on. Sometimes, she understood, that was what love actually was. Not the dress and the meadow and the 2,000 witnesses. Not the stone with the 400 years of promises on it. Not the ring from a dead mother, or the seer's words in a distant city, or any of the loud, showy, dangerous things the world had tried to teach her love was supposed to look like. Sometimes love was a man who sat across from you in a rented room and let you cry without touching you. Sometimes love was him coming back in the spring, and the summer, and the fall, and not asking. Sometimes love was the person who, on the worst night of your life, when you were on your knees in the dirt of a vineyard with your mother's torn dress around you and the whole valley pretending you did not exist, walked up behind you and put a coat on your shoulders and sat down 6 feet away and turned his head so that you could have your face to yourself and waited. Elara Voss had been, she thought, a girl who wanted a man who would claim her. She had become, she thought, a woman who knew the difference between being claimed and being chosen. That difference, she thought, sitting across a kitchen table from Kyle Draven in the spring of her 27th year with the thrush still making a fool of itself in the yard and her father's footsteps coming up the path from the barn, was what nobody had told her when she was younger, and was what she would, if she ever had a daughter, sit down across a table from that daughter one day and say, in whatever words the daughter needed to hear it, "The people who love you do not need to erase you to have you. The ones who need to erase you to have you are not loving you. They are using you. Learn the difference. Learn it young if you can, and late if you have to, but learn it." Her father came in the back door with mud on his boots, and he looked at the two of them holding hands across the table, and his face did a small, tired, pleased thing, and he said, "Tea still hot?" "Yes, Dad." "Good," Hale Voss said. He sat down at the table. He poured himself a cup, and the three of them sat in the kitchen, in the spring, in a valley that had been the whole world once and was not the whole world anymore. And the thrush in the yard kept singing, and Elara Voss, who had been hollowed at a binding stone in a meadow 3 autumns ago and had refused to stay hollow, drank her tea.